and we're a bit late, but this is the movie discussion pocket dimension where time does not exist. The only thing that matters is film. I'm Cole, joined by Jay, and if anybody is watching, we did give you a heads up for what this episode would be. Actually, I'm not sure if we said exactly what the order would be. We mentioned a couple ones that were coming up, one being Steven Spielberg's 1941, and the other the Brazilian film City of God. This is 1941. Going back to some somewhat familiar territory in that we've covered two other Spielberg films on the show before, although it's been quite a while. They were both sort of early in the show, and all three sort of share a common trait in that they're considered lesser known Spielberg movies and less successful ones, and they often get mentioned and it's actually mislabeled as flops when technically none of the three are flops. It's more of just sort of the Spielberg effect, which is most of his movies are such massive successes that when one or two, when a couple of them aren't, they're called flops. But really, in the case of AI and Empire of the Sun, the other one we did, neither were commercial flops. They just didn't have quite the amount of success. The other, I can't remember exactly what we said about the critical response to Empire of the Sun, but with AI, critical response was very divided. And in the case of this movie, 1941, which again was fairly successful, just wasn't the mega hit that he had just beforehand and afterwards. This movie is sandwiched between Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a huge hit, and then I think the next movie he did after this was going back to the Alien and doing E.T., which of course were both huge hits. Um, but this movie was considered a critical flop in that it got pretty savaged by critics and sort of the first real sort of blow, I guess, to Spielberg's career, which it was such a meteoric rise. Starting with like a TV movie, Duel, that was very well received as a TV movie, and they did what was it, Sugarland Express, which wasn't a hit or like a big hit or anything, but was fairly successful. And then Jaws, the massive success if it was, pretty much coining the term blockbuster, and then following that up with an even bigger scale movie in Close Encounters. So he's already quite a roll. This movie, you could say, was him sort of stumbling and then just getting sort of right back on the roll. I mean, he'd follow this up with what, like Raiders of the Lost Ark in '81 and E.T. in '82. So yeah, in the case of all three, none of them are flops. None of them, lost money or anything like that. But it's sort of, again, just the Spielberg effect. They're sort of flops within the context of his super successful career, I guess you would say.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I guess if you have to have a flop, it's. I mean, it's good to have one that's financially successful.
hmm
I mean, its budget was what, like 35, and worldwide was like 90 something.
Yeah, so yeah, it made well over twice the money back, and I guess it did quite well. However, it works like on TV through the '80s when it would show up, and that's also when we talk about a lot of these movies that are like, even when they are commercial flops or critical flops at the time, sometimes they get sort of somewhat reevaluated over the following years and find an audience and get cult status. I never really heard about this one having cult status, but that's what it says on the Wikipedia page, that it became somewhat of a cult movie.
Yeah.
But it's weird to me because this was a movie that I never saw growing up, was never on TV. No one ever seemed to talk about it. So I only basically saw 1941 for the first time like 2 years ago, maybe something like that. It was a movie that was very difficult to find in a way. Not as difficult as other movies, but I just mean, again, within the context of somebody like Spielberg, a big mainstream director, and this was a big mainstream movie. I guess the other reason people might think of it as a flop is because of how ambitious it was. I couldn't find anything that said necessarily, but it must have been the biggest budget comedy at that point in history. Like, what would have had a bigger budget as a comedy before this? Like, I can't think of anything. This movie had a huge budget. It had the backing of not one but two major studios. What was it? It was both Paramount and Universal. Both both backed this movie, which is a bit different. Or sorry, Universal and Columbia. Yeah, it was Universal and Columbia. So that makes it quite special because that's not really a normal thing. And of course, it had a big cast. Not everybody in it was stars at the time, but it certainly did have star power for the time. And
Totally.
uh, John Williams was on board as usual. But it's a really big, ambitious movie, and maybe I can't say for certain at the time the biggest budget comedy, but it had to be one of the biggest budget comedies for sure. And it was ambitious for that reason. On like the scale of the movie, it was a big a big budget, a lot of stuff happening, a lot of special effects that would have been on par with any sort of like great adventure or action film of the day. I mean, there's more destruction and stuff blowing up in this movie than plenty of the '80s action films that would follow it. It's really quite something from that perspective. So, and yet it doesn't seem to get talked about much, except within the context of it being one of Spielberg's failures or flops or whatever. And so it'd be interesting to get into this, what we feel about it. I will refer, of course, our audience to the previous Spielberg episodes, so check them out if you haven't, or revisit them if you want. Basically, I was before we even came up with the show, I always championed Empire of the Sun because I love it. So I really wanted to do Empire of the Sun for this show, and I was really happy to do it. And so basically, that was basically me just being effusive in praise for the movie. And I know Jake likes it quite a bit too, so we both really liked it. And with AI, it was kind of, I think, at least from my perspective, I was kind of hoping I would have a turnaround on the movie because I saw it years before, didn't care for it. But in reevaluating it, I still had all the same problems with it, if not even more.
Yeah.
And we just,
It was still a fun discussion, though. I enjoyed revisiting it.
yeah, I'm glad we did it.
Yeah. Still not a big fan of the movie, but it is an interesting
It's an
film.
interesting movie.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that way about this one so far, in that, like, I think I do like it more than AI, in a way, because it doesn't make the glaring mistakes that I think AI made. It still makes mistakes. I think this is a highly flawed film, and you can understand why it wasn't quite the success that other Spielberg movies were. Like, I don't think anybody's ever going to refer to this movie as a classic. Except unless you're talking about sort of like it being, again, evocative of that era just because of where certain actors were in their careers and stuff like that. But I just mean, I don't know, it's not a movie people reference or quote or anything, and kind of with good reason, because I feel like it's a fun setup, but it doesn't sort of deliver on its promise. Like, it's sort of like a
Yeah.
fun, wacky setup, and I'm not saying wacky stuff doesn't happen, but it's just the comedy isn't strong enough, the writing's not strong enough, the characters aren't strong enough, is the main thing, I feel. We're going to get into it in more detail, but that's kind of how I feel, like, on the surface level.
Yeah, just imagine pitching this. Like, green light, absolutely. Look at the main stars and not, I mean, just like the people that are all the way down the list are huge stars, like James
Yeah.
Caan, Mickey Rooney,
Yeah.
But, I mean, the producers,
It's like Mickey Rourke's first film appearance, too, although he's there for like 5 seconds.
yeah, it's so many people in this film that, don't even have big roles, a lot of them, but,
Hmm.
you know, Robert Zemeckis is one of the writers.
Right, he and, was Bob Gale, who were
Yeah.
both, they're the guys that would go on to write Back to the Future a few years later, be hugely successful, but this is them writing together, and maybe it's them sort of finding their way, because I feel like, yeah, the writing isn't bad, but it's just kind of bland and not up to par with sort of, again, the scale of the movie, what the movie's trying to accomplish. But yeah, like you said, green light. You can understand why Spielberg at this time, it's the late '70s. Spielberg is the fastest rising star of all like the newer directors of the last few years by far. So they're like, sure. He's like, I've got a great idea, or whoever pitched it, or however they said, big budget World War II comedy. It's funny. It says on the Wikipedia page about how when they were talking about the role that Robert Stack played, he thought he'd considered both Charlton Heston and John Wayne, and John Wayne actually even read the script and was really upset by it, and said like, "This, you shouldn't do this," and said, you can't make a comedy about World War II. This is a serious thing," which I think is ridiculous. Of course you can make a comedy about World War II. Yeah, of course World War II is serious and people died and stuff, but that's making it sound like nothing else in history is serious. But I think that's just a very narrow view from John Wayne. Of course, it's part of his image, right? And John Wayne basically dodged the draft and then spent the next 2 decades inserting himself into World War II movies to show how patriotic he was, which I think is pretty hilarious. Fucking hypocrite that he was. But, yeah, so he was vehemently against this movie and said, like, it was, like, unpatriotic and would be a bad, career move for Spielberg to do. Because, like, yeah, so, it's kind of interesting. It's one thing to have, like, an actor turn down the part and say, it's not right for me, or I'm doing something else. But him to just say turn down the part and then say you also just shouldn't do the movie at all. So, but I mean, of course you can do a comedy about World War II. You can do comedy about pretty much
Well,
anything, and it's not like this hadn't been attempted before and even been successful. Back in the '60s, before the term too soon existed, there was a little show called Hogan's Heroes,
yeah.
which was about a bunch of Americans who were in a POW camp run by Nazis, basically. And the Nazis were, portrayed as like bumbling fools, and it was all, silly, and nothing serious happened on it. Even though by the 60s we already knew that besides the POW camps, the Nazis had concentration camps where horrible things happened, and while the POW camps were certainly better than that, they still were no picnic or anything to make fun of, and yet the show kind of walked that line, and people were okay with it and laughed at it, and it was a fairly successful show.
What about MASH? That was a huge show,
Yeah.
And MASH had already come out, and I think probably ended already by that time.
No, MASH was still going in 1979.
Was
That's
it?
the funny thing about MASH. It was so successful. It was 11 seasons about a war that lasted for 3 years. So they just stretched it out. With MASH, I think it's a little more understandable though than like Hogan's Hero, because MASH was a blend of comedy and drama. It still had very dark, serious, dramatic moments. In fact, that's why some people got kind of upset with the show as it went on, because it felt like earlier it had a good balance, and that later it just got really heavy-handed. I don't know. I haven't seen enough episodes of MASH. I've seen episodes of MASH, but not like a whole bunch to form like a great opinion on the show.
It's so many episodes. It's like something I don't even want to undertake.
But I think its last episode aired in '82 or '83 or something like that.
Yeah,
And
it's
for
like one of the biggest finales.
Yeah, and for the longest time, it held the record for like biggest TV audience
Yeah,
in the U.S. or whatever. And the show was absolutely beloved, and people were like really emotional about it, and that's fine. But as we said, but yeah, I just think it was just a silly thing for John Wayne to say, "Oh, you can't make fun of World War II or anything." Well, of course you can, as long as comedy works, as long as you do it if you're funny. But the problem with this movie is that it's not funny enough, and I don't want to use my own personal experience too much to taint what we're going to talk about. But just a few days ago, I watched another movie that's kind of similar in that it was a flop, more of a flop than this movie, but also in that it was ambitious and stuff, and that's Last Action Hero. I watched Last Action Hero the other day, and it's easy for me to understand why I failed, because I feel like that movie is not just like unfunny, but it's painfully unfunny. Like, not only do jokes like not land, I just think they're fucking terrible. Like, I watched that movie thinking, I remember some people saying, that movie's actually a little ahead of its time and being self-referential and stuff. I was like, yeah, I'm willing to look at this with fresh eyes, but I did not enjoy Last Action Hero. And I think there are some parallels between it, and that they're both, like, taking place in California, mostly. And they also both have a scene where people, like, crash into the La Brea tar pits.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I actually thought of that movie.
Yeah, there you go. But
Was that
but
your
how I
first
feel,
time to see it?
it's not my first time. It's my first time in many years. Like, I saw it a couple times probably growing up, but it was probably the first time I looked at it like as a more, an adult critical eye and stuff. And man, did I like really not enjoy it. Was I really annoyed by like almost everything that happened in it.
Yeah, it was like well-known failure at the time. But I'm sure the budget on that thing was huge too.
Yeah. So that's why I was making the parallel, just because they
Yeah.
have similar things. But in the case of 1941, I feel like some of the jokes fall flat, but it's not like they bother me. It's just like, oh, there's not enough. Like, there's no oomph there. Whereas, like, where I thought with, and again, it's not really fair comparing the films or anything, but it's fresh in my mind thinking about it. Whereas it felt like every time they tried to make a joke in the other movie, like, it, not only to fall flat, but it, like, splat. I was like, oh, that's terrible. Like, I can't think of one good line from that movie at all. Like, and I have a good memory for the lines right now. I can't think of one good line in that movie. Like, not even a passable one. They're all just cringe-worthy and I don't know. But anyway, I'm not trying to turn our discussion about 1941 into me bashing that. But just in watching them both in around the same time, I realized there were some similarities there, context-wise and even content-wise, which I thought was kind of interesting. But the main thing I take away is I still like 1941. I get the things that are wrong with it, and I wish that they could have been better, because it's not like I loved it or anything like that, but there's still things that I kind of respect about it and like. Then you can understand, it's a Spielberg film, it's going to be well made and well shot and look great and all that, and it does.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Those aspects of it look great. All the
Mm-hmm.
effects and the miniature work and stuff, it all looks great. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just doesn't. It doesn't work for me either. The comedy is it's it's non-existent. I mean, I think the only thing I actually laughed at was maybe John Belushi like falling down or something.
Yeah.
I mean that was I didn't laugh at all hardly.
Yeah, one of the times when he falls down, in the part where he's at the airfield run by the crazy colonel, and the two guys like help him up onto the plane, and he like
Mm-hmm.
falls over the wing.
Yeah.
Like he actually really injured himself on that take. That's why the camera cuts away so quickly, because he actually really did get injured, but they kept the take in because they thought it was funny. But yeah, I almost felt like they didn't really even know what to do with John Belushi, really.
No.
Like the character promises all this wackiness and stuff, and again, I don't feel like it fits or works. And I realize the whole point of the movie is, it's not real life. It's wacky suspensions of disbelief. But it's just weird thinking about his character from any sort of critical standpoint, because you're like, this guy's like, yeah, I get that he's nuts, but like, wouldn't like the military actually be like actively hunting him down? You can't just go AWOL like this and go on your own personal little mission. You can't be in the Air Force and obviously you have your missions and just decide, I'm going to fly around the U.S. and look for Japanese planes because I think there are some. Like, you can't just do that. Can you imagine, like, getting in, like, today and, like, getting, like, a $1 billion, like, F-18 22 fighter and stuff like that, and just being like, I'm going to go hunt down some North Korean fighters over in the Pacific. Like, no, you can't just decide that on your own. You're a soldier and you take orders and you so yeah, this guy's just this renegade who's flying around. I mean, I get it's funny, and his introduction is kind of funny. Like he's out in Death Valley and he stops at the same gas station that's in Duel,
Ah, I didn't realize that.
and he just like thinks he can take everything for free because he's fighting for his country, and then he actually blows the place up, which is a bit much. I don't think he really needed to blow it up, but it sets the tone for the movie because the movie's basically destruction. Basically, the movie is 2 hours long, and we're doing the theatrical cut because there is a director's cut that is like longer. So if you wanted to buy a Blu-ray of it, was released in 2014, and that includes both versions. So there's like a 2.5 hour version, which I guess I'd be interested to see. But anyway, for the sake of this show, Jay and I watched the theatrical cut, so that's what we'll be talking
I
about.
felt like
But
this
anyway.
one was too long. I don't know if I want to see any more.
Yeah, because it's like the first hour is basically setup, and then the second hour is all the action,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I feel like the second hour is less interesting and
Mm-hmm.
drags on too much. Is really how I felt. Like I thought the first hour was okay, and then the second hour, when things are supposed to actually be happening, I felt was like drawn out and not that interesting. Even though that's when all the actual action takes place for the most part, and it's a solid hour of it. Really, it goes on and on. And I just felt like I don't know, it wasn't good enough.
Um, yeah, I totally agree. I know that director's cut has the deleted scene with John Landis.
Oh yeah,
John Landis has a cameo apparently, um,
so many people in this movie.
and apparently, according to IMDb, that Spielberg took it out after their dispute in the Twilight Zone
Oh right.
um, over I guess the death of the people and the kids and stuff.
Well, who was mad at who for that? Like, did Landis blame Spielberg or something, or?
I thought Spielberg kind of threw Landis under the bus there, didn't he? I mean, I don't really know exactly what happened, but I mean, when you hear that brought up, you don't ever hear Spielberg's name mentioned.
Yeah, that's true.
But it must have been in Landis's segment.
Yeah. What year was that? Was that 80?
Gotta be right.
Yeah. Well, it was very close to this. Yeah. Yeah. John Milius was an executive producer on this too. Like, just so many big names, a who's who. Although some of the people were upcoming.
Yeah. I mean, Treat Williams, a young Treat Williams, the first thing I've ever
Yeah.
seen him in.
Didn't he? I thought he looked a lot like a young Colin Farrell
Hmm.
in that. Treat Williams was another. He kind of fizzled, right? He started like in this big. He starts off in this big budget Spielberg movie, and then he just basically becomes sort of known for doing like, to me at least, like more B list type stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's what he eventually went to.
Like
But
I basically associate Treat Williams with somebody like Lou Diamond Phillips.
uh,
They're
yeah,
kind of at the same level.
Lou Diamond Phillips has a successful TV show at least.
That's true.
Um, it's still going, I think, on Netflix. But so, oh yeah, the director's cut. Yeah, man, I can't imagine another 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
Hmm. But as we said, like from a technical standpoint, it's visually great. They do a really great job of sort of recreating 1941 California.
Hmm.
Everything looks really good. So the movie itself, of course, is based loosely on some real life events. And I don't mean World War II, although sure, yes. Because the whole point is, it is true that in the wake of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, there was a lot of, worry and rampant speculation, particularly in California, that part geographically, that they were next. That was basically what was going to come next. That they were going to be a target for the Japanese. So there was a lot of anxiety and worry. And the whole point of this movie is sort of to show it taken to the extreme, and I guess it is. I guess it is something. I mean, I understand why somebody like John Wayne wouldn't have a sense of humor about it, but you gotta give him credit for having a sense of humor about Americans during World War time. Because basically, what happens is, although there actually is a Japanese sub in the area, it poses almost no threat. But through their own hysteria, the Americans basically managed to level their own town, shoot down not one but two of their own planes, and also and do have a land target destroyed by the Japanese, although it's not an important land target. It's an abandoned fair or whatever.
And installed a gun in someone's yard in Maine, I believe.
Yeah, I was just gonna say part of the thing that's about loosely based. Yeah, that's another thing that did really happen, but on the complete opposite side of the country
It's kind
in
of
Maine.
disturbing to know that all this stuff actually happened.
Yeah. Again, it's loosely based, and just like the riot that happens is based on the Zoot Suit riots, which actually happened in 1943, and much of the war paranoia, was, of course, was more in 42 than 41. Because keep in mind, this would have been the very end of 41. Pearl Harbor was what, like the 7th or something like this. This movie's only a couple weeks later, around Christmas time, and because there was something, what was it called, like part of that war hysteria was called, I think, the Battle of Los Angeles, which of course is a battle that never actually happened, but a battle that people thought happened, which was again part of the war nerves, as it's called. It was like a rumored attack and anti-aircraft artillery barrage, which would have been February 24th and February 25th in 1942 over Los Angeles. But anyway, basically, it was later called like a false alarm. But there were certain newspapers that said that there was maybe a cover up, that something really did happen and the military was covering up and stuff. As far as I can tell, there's not really any proof that anything actually happened. That this was sort of like a sort of a mass hysteria thing, and a few mistakes and misidentifications. And again, that's very much what this movie's about. It really is uh, a comedy of errors in every sense, um, which is usually funny, but I don't know, just for all the build-up, doesn't really deliver in this.
Um, I really can't. I mean, I guess this is kind of like a passion piece for Spielberg.
Oh, I think so. I was going to
Because
talk more about that too.
I mean, can you imagine coming off of, or I guess four if you go with his TV movies.
Yeah.
Like so this is like his fifth film, right? Fifth feature.
I
and he
believe so.
goes with a comedy.
Hmm.
And he wanted to do a musical. He said he was close to doing a musical. I think that would have been even worse.
Well, yeah. What I say about this, and we talked about this in other shows too, is that it seems like for not all directors, but a lot of directors, deep down, and not always deep down, a lot of them, no matter what they're good at or what they've achieved, they really want to do a big budget musical. Like they really want to. Um, who was it? Was it Scorsese? I always get Scorsese and the other guy mixed up with it. Hold on. Uh, who's the other guy? Scorsese and the guy that did Apocalypse Now.
Oh, Coppola.
Coppola. I always get them mixed up, but they both did musicals that didn't do well. One who I can forget who's who, but in 1977, one did New York, New York, which wasn't a straight musical, but was still very much a lavish thing. The thing with De Niro, and then in the early 80s, the other one did One for the Heart, which was a musical and was a huge bomb and like almost tanked his career for the 80s. I think that was Scorsese, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, Scorsese. It wasn't until like Goodfellas at the end of the 90s that Scorsese kind of came out of the swoon that was caused by One for the Heart. Um, yeah, it seems like most directors, it's part of their bucket list to do like a big sort of lavish musical production. And if they can't even get a full movie out of it, to at least in one of their movies have like a big musical type scene. Hell, even Jackie Chan did this. He made a movie called Miracle at the end of the 80s that was like a big, that was basically loosely based on Pocketful of Miracles, which in itself was a remake of another musical from the 30s. And again, it's still Jackie Chan, you know, doing some kung fu and running around stuff, but it's very much set against the backdrop of like this 19th century, or I can't remember exactly when it is, or maybe it's early 20th century stuff with all this, you know, big musical productions and dancers and stuff. It was very lavish. Actually, the movie's very good from what I've heard. I'm dying to see it. So yeah, it just seems to be something that a lot of directors, it's important to them. They want to do it at least once, and I can understand why Spielberg thought this was the perfect time to do it, because this was at the time where I think the studios would have said yes to anything,
Yeah.
and so he took his chance, and what he produced was uh, not terrible, but I don't know, not probably what he wanted. I think he did. Speaking of that whole thing where like, if a director doesn't have the chance to do an entire movie of it, they still maybe can get at least a scene from it. I feel like Spielberg could have skipped this movie and just been satisfied with the opening scene of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, because that gets everything in there. That's great. Remember that opening scene? And they're at the nightclub in Shanghai. There's a big musical number. She's singing what is it? Anything Goes, with a big line of chorus dancers and everything, and then it turns into a big fight. Of course, like that's great, and that's all. But it's not the whole movie. But yeah, that just seems to be something that a lot of directors, it's important to them to do at least once. They really want to do a big lavish musical number. And it's and in the case of this movie, I'd actually say that part might be the best part of the movie, really. It's handled almost expertly. Like that's a brilliant scene in many ways, the whole dance hall thing.
Hmm.
And it, again, sort of shows how good Spielberg is, because those types of scenes are difficult, because it's a lot of choreography and it's a lot of people, and you have to have good camera work and editing to make it flow and stuff. And it really does. That whole scene where they're doing the dance contest and the other guy's chasing him around trying to fight him, and all this other hijinks is happening, and then it all culminates in a big riot. It's done really well, and it's really entertaining. I actually feel like that might be the strongest part of the movie. So I don't really have any sort of issue with the musical part of the movie. It's kind of the other stuff that falls flat for me more so. I would say, for me personally, that was kind of the best part. I really liked that stuff.
Yeah. It's. I don't think we mentioned this is kind of like an SCTV reunion. You know, we've got three of the main guys from SCTV.
Yeah.
Um, but
Which, I mean, at the time was successful on a certain level, but they weren't
yeah,
like household names or anything, right? It's not like they were massive comedy stars.
this may have been before like SNL was huge.
Yeah. But, who is it? Dan Aykroyd's in this movie, and it's before he's really known for anything, and he's fine, but he doesn't really do anything particularly
Yeah,
special. John
it's
Candy's in it for about 5 seconds.
yeah. Dan Aykroyd's like the most straight character I think I've ever seen him play, and it's so odd to like. I almost like forgot it was him at times because
Hmm.
he was just such a straight man,
He really is. Like
just wasted, you know.
yeah, yeah. He's really the voice of like jingoism, in this movie, where he's all about patriotism and all that stuff and fear mongering and stuff. Although, again, you understand why people would have been like that at the time. But
Oh
it
sure.
is pretty interesting. But yeah, he's got that part where after he breaks up the riot by driving a tank right into the middle of it, and he scolds them all for fighting each other. Then he starts talking about how the Japanese are going to invade and kill everybody and stuff. And I understand why people might have thought that. I mean, again, hindsight of decades and information and stuff reveals pretty much that, well, the Japanese uh, thought they were going to win the war against the U.S., which is why they attacked them in the first place. You don't attack somebody if you don't think you can win the war. Their vision of winning the war wasn't invading the U.S. All they wanted was to get the U.S. to back off so they could have a free hand in the Pacific, because they knew the U.S. were the biggest threat to them there. And that's really what they wanted. They did not envision themselves conquering the continental U.S. and taking it over and, the stuff he's talking about, killing people and telling them they can't practice their religion and everybody's going to speak Japanese and stuff. That was never really going to be the end game for Japan. I guess unless things went extremely well. But no, what they wanted was to be able to do what they wanted in the Pacific, because they had a lot of interest there, just like the U.S. did, specifically, most specifically, the Philippines, which the U.S. had been in control of since 1898, when they beat the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. That was the main thing they won, was control of the Philippines. And as we know, Japan spent World War II. Before World War II really got going, they were going around invading various parts of Southeast Asia. And yeah, they knew eventually they'd come into contact with the U.S., which is why they did their preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor. Yada yada. But again, you can totally understand why people in California would have been nervous and think,
Sure.
"Oh yeah, the bombers are coming." I mean, I get it.
Oh yeah, they like. Then didn't they sound an air raid and it was like riots and stuff? Was that the Zoot Suit riots?
Um,
Or
the Zoot Suit riots was more a clash between soldiers and the citizenry,
like a
specifically
race thing, right?
specifically Mexican Americans
Hmm.
who were there. I think it's just because I think it's more just because they were kind of an easy target, for scapegoating and stuff. I don't really know. I haven't read up on that
I
riot.
read briefly about
The
it because
specifics.
I've heard the term, but I wasn't exactly familiar with what it was. But
Yeah.
I think it was targeting the minorities because they were wearing the zoot suits that
Hmm.
apparently use a lot of fabric, and apparently fabric was supposed to be, rationed
Right, just like
at
pretty
that
much everything.
time.
Yeah, they
So
thought, we've got these guys that are already basically foreigners in our
yeah,
country, and now they're like being really unpatriotic and stuff because they're being wasteful and they don't
yeah, that's
appreciate.
that's how it was seen, unpatriotic, by
Yeah.
wearing the zoot suits,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
is
And of course, they push back by saying you're treating us like second-class citizens, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really what it was more about, with the backdrop of war and paranoia and stuff going on with it. Of course, this movie doesn't touch on that. It just it has a Zoot Suit Riot, but for completely different reasons, to comedic effect. Because again,
it's hilarious. Yeah,
this movie was
always.
not this movie's not about deep social commentary. I mean, there's a little bit, as we talked about, but it's more try to be skimming along the surface to be fun. The point of the movie is to be light-hearted and
Right.
fun, despite the fact that this would have been a very serious time. What I thought was interesting is right at the beginning, when we have the introduction of those characters, when we've got was it Treat Williams and those soldiers and the guy at the diner, is the main guy who, as far as I can tell, never went on to do anything. He was only there because he was in one of Robert Zemeckis' movies a few years earlier. So I guess Robert Zemeckis knew him and recommended him. But anyway, it's like, remember, he's at the diner and he's the waiter, and of course he's the one that wants to win the dance competition. He's obsessed with it.
Right.
But he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And I didn't catch it till the second time watching the movie. Is not only is he wearing a Hawaiian shirt, but he actually has a Hawaiian shirt that on the back has a logo that says Pearl Harbor on it, and
Yeah.
has like pictures of like American Navy and stuff. And one of the reasons they attack him is they say that it's in bad taste. And I'm thinking, isn't it the opposite of bad taste? Isn't that sort of what we do nowadays? You know, like I remember there was a bombing in Boston a few years ago, and people wore shirts that said like "Boston Strong."
Right.
You know,
I
so
mean,
I'm thinking, how's it bad taste that this guy's wearing a Hawaiian shirt days after there was an attack on Hawaii? To me, that's him showing his support. But I don't know.
I mean, isn't this like days after the bombing? So there's no way he had this shirt made.
Yeah,
So he just has a Hawaiian shirt that has Pearl Harbor on it. Eh.
yeah. But to me, yeah, I mean, I get it. Maybe that's part of the writing is like the soldiers would have used any excuse to attack him because they just didn't like him.
Yeah.
But I just thought that was funny because I'm thinking, I think he's being very patriotic by wearing that shirt. He's saying, I support Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. But I don't know. Who knows? Oh, I can see you again. That's weird.
Oh.
I don't know what that was. It doesn't matter. I figured it was me. I've been clicking off, looking at other things just to check some of my notes here and stuff. But anyway, doesn't matter as long as the audience can see you. I see enough of you. I don't care.
Yeah, man. I really can't believe the cast in this film.
Yeah, and yet it was sort of like people that nowadays would be smaller stars and lesser known that were kind of in the biggest roles.
Yeah.
Like the guy I mentioned. So let's see. I need to.
Like Wally, I think is his name. The guy you're talking about.
Yeah, Wally. There's not exact. It's an ensemble movie. There's no true main character, but he might be the closest to a main character we have, and he comes out as sort of the hero of the movie, whereas most people, everybody else is kind of a fuck up. But his name is Bobby DeCicco or Chico.
Yeah.
And yeah, as I said, his first movie was a movie called I Want to Hold Your Hand, which is a movie about the Beatlemania phenomenon, and that was written and directed by Robert Zemeckis. So as far as I can tell, like he basically got into this movie because he was recommended by Zemeckis. I assume he'd show up in some other movies over the next few years, like Splash. But yeah,
He was in Ghoulies 4.
yeah, I see that. I thought I figured that would jump out at you. Also, one of the Maniac Cop movies, Maniac Cop 3. And again, Treat Williams is important in this movie, but I don't know. But Nancy Allen, I don't know. She doesn't. That doesn't mean anything to me.
RoboCop.
Yeah, she looks so different in RoboCop.
I mean, she's done a lot of things, but RoboCop's what I really.
Yeah. Oh, it's worth pointing out when we're talking about the cast is that this was the first American movie to have Toshihiro Mifune, who is one of the biggest stars ever from Japan. But in 1979, American audiences were going to know him. They don't have access to Japanese movies, really. But he was a huge star in Japan, particularly because of his close relationship with Akira Kurosawa. I think he did like 15 films with him or something, and a lot of the big ones, and mostly in like starring roles. So that's kind of cool, even though it's cool, I guess, from like at the time, I guess it would have been cool from like a film buff perspective. But again, in 1979, the average American film goer is not going to know him or recognize him. And it's not even their fault. Well, they don't have the access to movies we do now. How are they going to see his movies unless they were privileged enough to get into various film festivals and stuff that might show some foreign films.
I'm sure Seven Samurai was around.
Sure, yeah, no, certain people would have seen it for sure. Yeah. But okay, here's another problem with. Even though I watched the movie twice in the last week, I watched it on Amazon Prime, which provides 0 subtitles for foreign parts. So all the scenes with them speaking Japanese and Christopher Lee for some reason speaking German, I could not follow. So I only had to follow what I saw. I didn't know what they were saying. I mean, for all the Japanese I've watched, I couldn't learn it by listening. So even though I've heard a lot of Japanese over the years, I still don't know what they were saying. So, like, fuck you, Amazon Prime. Like, how can you have that? And I looked it up online and stuff, and they do it with a lot of movies, and people say on message boards, like, there's no point telling Amazon Prime about this because they don't understand the difference between subtitles of foreign languages and closed captioning. They don't see the difference. They seem to think that it's all the same thing, and they just talk about closed captioning options. Because, yeah, of course, that's the first thing I did was I put on closed captioning. Still didn't matter. I got closed captioning for the English and zip for the foreign language.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and apparently there's quite a few movies on Amazon Prime that it's the exact same situation. So I did lose a bit of the movie in that I did not get that dialogue. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, I have no idea why. For one thing, I think this is just artistic license. It seems weird to me that there's a German like commander. I don't even know what his rank is, of course, on the sub with the Japanese. I've never read anything about something like that actually happening in real life. Um, but maybe they just felt like it was in. They felt like it couldn't be a real World War II movie if they didn't have like an honest to god German or Nazi or whatever in there. Because they also seem to play up that he was like worse than the Japanese in some way. Like the Japanese, they were the enemy, but this guy was like worse. I don't know. That's kind of what I got out of it. And then towards the end, again, I have no dialogue to go at this. When they're firing on the carnival rides and stuff, there's a part where suddenly, Christopher Lee, the German, takes out his pistol and turns on them. I don't know why. And Mifune's character, their captain, like kicks the gun out of his hand and tosses him overboard, and they all laugh at him. I don't know why that happened. Maybe you could fill me in why that happened.
I don't remember the dialogue exactly. I watched this on Vudu, and I think pretty sure it was captioned all the foreign language.
Yeah, so he's Captain Wolfgang von Kleinschmidt. I'm looking at the cast list here and the characters. And yeah, it seems like he's there like in an advisory capacity, I don't know, or something like that. And what's funny is they're all speaking Japanese and he speaks German. There's no common language between them. Apparently, at least their captain understands German, and they talk back and forth. But I don't know what's being said. Like for some of the scenes, of course, I can get the gist of what's going on. Like when they capture Slim Pickens's character, and they're trying to get the compass from him, and they're trying to interrogate him and stuff like that, because they're looking. I mean, it's a pretty bad joke. They think. So again, the sub seems to be kind of similar to, except it's a whole sub, to the situation I was talking about with John Belushi. Are they just rogue? Are they off on their own doing their own thing, or is this official mission? Because again, I don't have the dialogue to support it. Like, do they have an official mission, or are they just doing this for kicks, like the way the pilot is? Because the pilot is definitely not an official mission. He's just flying around doing what he wants.
Well, didn't they say they wanted to blow up something?
They wanted to blow up Hollywood.
Yeah,
Right? And
they
the
wanted
whole
to blow.
joke with Slim Pickens is his character's name is like Hollis Wood or
Yeah,
something really stupid and
it's funny.
unfunny. And didn't you think it was weird when he's introduced? He's driving along in like this sort of like, I mean, it wouldn't have been antique at the time, in 1941. He's driving along this really old truck and he's listening to music or something, and he's also like drinking from like a flask or something or something. He's drinking anyway. He's drinking alcohol. Like when they made Halloween 4, is that what they were going for with that guy that picks Loomis up? Because it's like the exact same thing. It's like an old guy in a really old antique truck who's really weird and is drinking. Because that's immediately what I thought of. I was like, is Halloween 4 referencing this movie? Is it an homage? Because it was like exactly the same.
I doubt it.
Yeah, probably not, but it's funny because it's so similar. He's only in the truck for a minute before they get him anyway, but that hit me. I was just like, this is just like that guy in Halloween 4, holy crap. But yeah, but of course Slim Pickens, yeah, it was a who's who of comedic people from the 70s. Slim Pickens is up there.
Commander Mitamura wants to destroy something honorable
Yeah, so
in
they
Los
pick,
Angeles.
yeah,
So
so they pick Hollywood, but I'm not really sure how they know his name is Hollis Wood, or if it's just a coincidence. Because again, I don't know. But then there's a part where they're trying to ask him about Hollywood, and he's saying, "You found me, don't you understand?" Because they're saying Hollywood, and he's like, "That's me." It's really dumb. Like it's not
well,
funny.
you can tell. Like I know John Belushi's character and Slim Pickens' character. They expanded the roles once they were cast. They were like, "Oh shit, we have Slim Pickens in this role. We've
Yeah.
got to make it more than what it was in the original screenplay."
Mm.
And same with Belushi. You know, he was a very minor character, but when it was John Belushi, and you can kind of tell, right, that it's because it's just it's pointless. All that stuff.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's an ensemble type thing, right? The whole point is there's all these different characters doing different things, and the whole point is how they all sort of come together in the
Yeah.
end to create chaos. And the movie does succeed in that regard. It's just not as interesting as it sounds like it should be. I guess is what it is. Like, Because usually I'm on board with that sort of thing. Okay, you got this person over here doing this person over here doing this. You know, conflicting forces coming into contact with each other, and then how it all mixes together. And that all happens, and yet it's just not satisfying the way it should be. And I can't exactly articulate why. Again, I think maybe the characters just aren't as funny and interesting as the movie tries to make them seem. Is a lot of it. Because, yeah, you have a whole lot of different points of view. I mean, it jumps around a lot. You have a storyline with Wally, who is who's not a soldier, who just wants to win the dance contest. His storyline collides with the storyline of the other soldiers. You know, the group that's led by Dan Aykroyd. Specifically because within that group is Treat Williams' character, Satarsky, because Satarsky, like, wants to, like, as far as I can tell, kidnap Wally's girlfriend. And that's, like, played for laughs, that he just wants to steal the girlfriend. And that's one of the parts that's really weird. As much as I praise the whole big dance number and stuff like that, it's like, what is this guy's plan? He's just going to kidnap this woman in front of all these witnesses? And she's acting like she doesn't want to be kidnapped, but she's not acting like she's being kidnapped. She's just sort of like trying to be polite about it. She keeps talking to people at tables. Hey, do you want to get me? And he's just dragging her out of there. She at no point does she yell, "Hey, I'm being kidnapped. This psycho is stealing me." Like, she doesn't do that. And then there's a really unfunny bit about her friend, who I guess it's supposed to be funny because she's, like, unattractive, like, is attracted to him and chasing him down the whole time. Like, I guess that's supposed to be funny, but it's not. So anyway, you have those two things intersecting. You have the whole thing about the family on the coast. That intersects with the soldiers too, because they're the family where they install the gun battery. You have the two guys that are part of the what is it? What's that group called? The Ground Observer Corps. You have the two guys that are, which was a real thing. That was a real thing back in the day. It was even a real thing beyond World War II. Anyway, the Ground Observer Corps, where they're, you know, supposed to watch for anything suspicious, and they're up in the Ferris wheel. So you have them.
Was that one of the guys with the ventriloquist dummy?
Yeah, that's those two. That his character's called Herb. So yeah, everybody remembers that guy because he would basically spend the 70s and 80s playing nerd characters because of his voice. I saw him just before that in Grease. You know, he's the character Eugene in Grease. Of course, because of that voice he's known for, he did quite a bit of voice work. I remember him. He was Dexter's rival scientist on Dexter's Lab. He was the other scientist that Dexter hated. And he was, you know, he did quite a few other voice things because it's a gold mine. What's his name? His name is Eddie Deason. But yeah, he's Herb, and he's up in the Ferris wheel with the other guy. I can't remember that guy's name. So you have their story, which eventually intersects with not only with the Japanese sub, but eventually with I'm umming so much for this, but Belushi's character, Captain Wild Bill Kelso, because they actually shoot him down, thinking he's a Japanese plane. So the whole point is, yeah, you have all these different people, and eventually they're going to crisscross and interact with each other and all come together. The Colonel, or whatever his name is, Robert Stack's character, is just basically there to disapprove of everybody and frown. And he's watching Dumbo for most of it. Because I guess Spielberg knew the value, even in 1979, of getting a Disney plug in where he could.
There's quite a few Disney plugs in this film.
Mm-hmm.
The whole bit when Aykroyd's going on about Mickey Mouse and Pluto, and
yeah,
I didn't see Pluto walking into Blitzkrieg or whatever he said.
But again, they were basically big symbols of America and patriotism at the time. They really were. It's kind of ironic, you know, that I've talked about this before because I'm into anime and manga and stuff. That, like, it was because of American soldiers who occupied Japan after World War II, bringing American comics and stuff with them, that basically inspired the greatest generation of manga artists, specifically Osamu Tezuka, which answers the age-old question where people always have asked, like, how come in most animes and mangas, like, even though they're Japanese characters, they look like Caucasians? It all goes back to that. because they based their drawing style on Walt Disney and American animators, who of course drew characters with wide eyes and stuff like that. So it didn't occur to them, oh, I have to make them look ethnically this or that, and they just drew that way, and that's why it went that way. So there's an answer to a question nobody's asking right now, but hey, it's interesting.
Yeah, I looked up that Eddie Deason guy. I know exactly who that is. Yeah,
Oh yeah, he's in
he's
a
in
lot of stuff,
all kinds of stuff.
and usually it's a typical nerd because I mean, who could be better?
Yeah.
What's weird is like it's supposed to be it's supposed to be he's annoying the guy, but but then you find out he's got a ventriloquist dummy with him. It's like this. Of course, that's even more annoying, but it's not because the ventriloquist dummy doesn't speak in his regular annoying voice. I thought his ventriloquist dummy was less annoying because it's usually the other way around, right? You have like a ventriloquist, then you have the dummy, and the dummy has the really dumb, annoying voice. But this guy's normal voice is so annoying that the dummy's voice sounds normal looking by comparison. I thought that was funny, but it was that was unintentional. That was not their intent, I don't think. So I'm not giving them points for that.
He was also in Critters 2.
Ah, nice. So many critters, people.
Yeah, we got Critters and Ghoulies.
Oh yeah, I mixed them up. I need a Critters Ghoulies crossover with both those guys. And of course, it's cool that Christopher Lee's in this movie because he is the center of the universe as far as I'm concerned. You can link him to anybody.
Yeah.
This is a guy that is in like 200 some movies over like 70 years.
Yeah.
You can link him to fucking anybody. And I mean, he lived a long, great life, but I'm still super sad that he's dead. Because as far as I was like, he should have lived to be like 120 and kept making movies.
Yeah, he was like 100 years old and made like a metal album. How awesome is that?
Yeah. I love that guy. And like, of all the people in the Lord of the Rings, he was the most hardcore fan. Mm-hmm. Like, he'd been reading the series like every year of his life for like 60 years or something. He like knew everything by heart anyway, even before he was cast, which I think is pretty badass. But yeah, so he's the villain in this too, because that's what he is. That's his. For a guy who was around a lot, he was super typecast, as you can understand. So this is probably not the only movie where he played a Nazi. He probably played a Nazi in a few other movies, I bet. But besides playing Nazis, he played Dracula multiple times in the Hammer films. He played Dracula like 10 times. He was a Bond villain. He was Scaramanga, the man with the golden gun, in The Man with the Golden Gun. He's a Star Wars villain.
Yeah.
He was Count Dooku. And he's a Lord of the Rings villain. He was Saruman.
Man.
So not only was he typecast as a villain, but he was typecast as the very best, the highest profile villains in cinema. But yeah. And he's got a fairly small role here, but that's how it goes on these sort of ensemble things.
They say Samuel L. Jackson has the highest box office of all of his films. I wonder what Christopher Lee's would be.
It'd be pretty high.
But,
yeah, I remember like the day Samuel L. Jackson. It was like the day Samuel Jackson found out like he became number one. It used to be Harrison Ford, and he edged him out.
Oh, really?
Like he wouldn't shut up about it. I was like, yeah, but like in the Harrison Ford movies he's in, he's always like the main guy. Like you're just like a lot of the movies you're in that are like counting big, are like Jurassic Park
yeah.
and stuff like that. But anyway, it's not like I don't like Samuel L. Jackson. Of course I like him. I just thought it was kind of silly of him to like crow like it was such a great, amazing accomplishment that he like was so responsible for it. Like it just works out that way.
So when they're doing that total, like, would they include all the Die Hard films or just the one he was in?
By the way, he's not anymore because if you're going by somebody who is credited as an actor in a movie, the winner is Stan Lee.
Yeah.
Because you add all those Marvel movies up, and it kills everything.
He's in half of those.
He's in more than half of them. He's in about 80. He's in like 80% of them, and he's in all the really big ones. In some of the early ones, he's not necessarily there. Like he's not in any of the Blades, for instance. But like once it became a thing, he's in all of them.
He showed up at the end of Iron Man 1, right?
Yeah.
So that was like one of the first those Marvel movies of that.
That's the first MCU movie. Yeah. And he's in all of them. He's in all the existing ones until the last one. The last one is the first one without him. The last Avengers movie. I don't think he's in that.
Oh, really?
If he is, I can't remember.
There's so many damn people in that movie. I can't.
What's funny is to me, like a lot of his cameos are quite funny and stuff like that, and they get better as the years. I think his best one, honestly, is in what's it called? Captain Marvel of all movies.
Oh, really? Still haven't seen that one.
Well, I won't give it away, but it's actually pretty funny, especially considering the way it hints at multiple universes, but not in like a comic booky way, just in a like way. Because he's doing some. I'll just say, like, he's just sitting on it. She's on a bus, and he's sitting on a bus reading something, and that's
Yeah.
all it is. But
Yeah.
what he's reading is what makes it.
You could tell me.
Okay, fine. Spoilers, I guess, not really a big deal, but for people, is okay. So the whole point, and they smash you over the head with this over and over again, is the fact that the Captain Marvel, most of it takes place in 1995.
Yeah.
Within like the first 5 seconds, she crash lands in a blockbuster, and then she gets up, and you see movie posters for like movies from that year and all this stuff. But anyway, and they hit you over the head with it over and over again with the soundtrack and stuff. And I don't care, I don't mind. I love the '90s, so why not? So it's supposed to be 1995, and so she lands on this bus, and she goes fighting somebody or something, and she goes by. Uh, Stan Lee is sitting on the bus reading, but he's reading the screenplay for Mallrats.
Ah, right.
Isn't that awesome? Because it suggests he's Stan Lee too. Because yeah, I think it's funny. But anyway, yeah, I think that was the most clever one. But yeah, so anyway, Samuel Jackson, you're gonna have to get in some more movies, which you will do. But and what's funny is Samuel Jackson himself is in a ton of Marvel movies.
Yeah. What I was like is he credited for like the entire Die Hard franchise because he was in one film?
I don't think so.
It's just
Or
the film
it
you
shouldn't
were
work.
in. Okay.
I think it's just the film you were in. I don't know. I guess I'll have to check because I don't know exactly how that goes.
He's Star Wars, Star Wars, Marvel. I'm trying to think of just huge franchises that he's in.
Well, Jurassic Park, the first one
Jurassic
for a couple
Park, yeah.
seconds.
Hold on to your butts.
I mean, I like him. I like him in that movie, and I like his
Yeah.
character. But
Goodfellas. He's got a small role in Goodfellas.
yeah,
He's got a shit. What was he in the other day? I saw something the other day with him in it. I've forgotten he was in it. Another before he was,
I mean, he's in a few pretty big Tarantino movies.
very well.
Although I don't know how well. I mean, Tarantino was always a pretty successful director, but I mean, he wasn't like a box office smashing director.
I think Pulp Fiction did quite well.
Probably, I'd assume. Yeah, and I mean,
to go look.
if everybody want to talk about most people think that's his ultimate role. That's what they associate Samuel Jackson with, is that role. I like it. I think it's a bit overrated, the role and the movie.
I mean, yeah, 20 years later, 20 whatever years later, it is a bit, but I don't know. At the time, it was pretty awesome.
Sure.
Oh yeah, he's in Hateful Eight too.
Yeah. Yeah. Of the Tarantino films, I think, even though I don't really like much care for the film, I think his most interesting character is the Django character. He's in Django Unchained. His character in that is much different from the typical one, which I kind of like.
He's um, the he's like I don't know, what do you call him? He like collaborates the slaves together.
Yeah, he's kind of like the Uncle Tomish type character, because
Yeah.
he's a slave, but he's totally loyal to like his master.
I'm trying to think of a non-offensive term to use.
Right. Well, yeah, but the thing is, like, he's like the head, he's like the head slave of the household,
Mhm.
and like he's totally loyal to his master and likes his role, and is actually like does not at all respect what Django's doing. Right. Like, even though Django's here to like try to
Right.
free the slaves, he like hates him and wants him, and he's his
Right.
enemy. So it's a very different sort of role.
Like he's on the side of the master.
Yeah, very much so. He's really loyal to him, and he likes his position, even though he's a slave. He's a higher slave than others. He kind of has a bit of authority, and he likes that. So I'm not much of a fan of the movie, but I did like that character, and I thought that was a good role for Samuel Jackson, because it was different from his usual thing, where he's usually just some super tough guy who were on his side. And this, like, Samuel Jackson's already pretty old, but in that movie they age him up even more. They make him even older.
He's older than he looks.
Yeah.
They say black don't crack.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Coming to America in '88. He was in Do the
I've
Right
never seen that
Thing.
movie.
He was in
Never seen Coming to America.
Jungle Fever, Exorcist 3, Goodfellas. Coming to America is an awesome film. I would recommend it.
Is that where like Eddie Murphy's The African Prince?
Hmm.
Yeah, I've seen pieces of it, but I've never like seen the whole thing. I've
Juice.
heard it's one of Eddie Murphy's better movies, though.
It's it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh
Honestly, like
wow.
probably one of my favorite comedies. Was it so well done? Where he and Arsenio Hall basically play all the characters in the film. Menace to Society, same year as Jurassic Park, and then True Romance. I think that's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great movie. I just don't know how much like bank it made.
No, I'm sure. Well, let me look at Pulp Fiction just while I'm here. I don't want to derail this too much, but what was that thing you posted of a like a blockbuster game you saw somewhere?
Yeah, I was at Walmart last week, and I didn't at first. It was in the movie section, and it probably which shouldn't have been in the movies. But I was like, "Is that a VHS? What the hell am I looking at?" And it was this box that kind of looked like a VHS, and I don't know what's inside it, but it was some sort of party game based on like the Blockbuster experience. I read the back and I couldn't really understand how it works, but it's like some sort of game with like multiple players. I guess some of it has to do with like movie trivia and stuff. I don't really know, but it's supposed to be like some sort of simulation of like the idea of like going out to a Blockbuster and renting movies. I don't know.
Man,
I'll have to look it up. That must be on somewhere.
good on them for coming up with that idea. I'm sure it'll sell, but it just
Yeah.
seems like an odd thing to make a game out of. Like, what are you gonna list the movies that didn't get it released by Blockbuster because they were considered offensive or something like that? I mean,
Here's the thing I wonder about. Okay, who I didn't look at it closely enough to tell you this. Who put the game out, and how does the licensing work? Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore, so they don't. So does that mean anybody anywhere can just use it,
I think there is still one open.
or is there some, or is there still some entity that will actually is like owed money if you use like Blockbuster's like logo and name and stuff? Like that's what I'm wondering. Like, is there still some sort of like Blockbuster that exists that it will, like, if you buy the game, will
Yeah,
get money from it? Like, I don't know how that works.
they probably just licensed the name
Yeah.
because I'm sure. I think there is still one open, one actual rental store open.
But yeah, get me out to this movie. Actually, I'm gonna have to leave you for a brief like 30 seconds. But before I do that, I was just gonna say like yeah. So the movie's jumping around and how it's all these different storylines, and the whole point of the movie is you have this character doing this, and they all come together. What did you think was the worst one? I thought the worst one was the other soldier that's not in that company. He's in a different company, and he meets the woman, and all he wants to do is fuck her in an airplane.
Yeah,
I thought that was easily the worst of the stories, and it's almost like mood whiplash you get from it. Because this is how it starts. So, because of course it's 1941, so guys could be a lot more sexist and stuff back then, and the movie shows that fine. So this isn't like me saying, oh, like with my 2019 wokeness saying, oh, this movie's so inappropriate. That's not what I mean at all. What I'm saying is, what happens is, like, he tells this story to the guy first. It's like, I knew her back at the blah, 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 and she has, like, a thing for airplanes. Like, they really get her going and stuff. So then during the thing, he's talking to her, and she's like, yeah, I remember you. And she's, like, totally not interested in it at all. But then he's like, that's it. That is it.
sorry, I didn't mean
No, that's funny, though, yeah.
to interrupt you.
Oh, yeah, see, I didn't get to see what it looks like inside or anything. Or what you use, like... I just read the back really quickly, and I don't know. I was pretty shocked when I saw it. But yeah, this is where we are in society now, where, like, people like, our age and older have, like, such a longing for those times that they can, like, capitalize off it by, like, making a game based on it.
Just trying to see what company put it out, but I don't see that on here.
Will you show the audience? I'll be back as quick as I can.
Okay,
Sorry about
sure.
this. I didn't mean for this to happen. I'll be right back.
Oh, no problem. So it looks like Big Potato is the. Yeah, Big Potato is the company that put this out. So really see games like this anymore. Like actual board games. Everything's all video. $20. Kind of intrigued actually. Like, what could the questions possibly be? Game for adults, teenagers. Choose their team member to go head to head in quickfire buzzer battle. So yeah, I think it's basically just movie trivia. So I mean, why even call it Blockbuster? I guess just using the name. Yeah. It's like Trivial Pursuits. Trivial Pursuits for Blockbuster. Yeah, Sam Jackson being in.
Sorry, I apologize for that. That's my own
no
fault. So what's happening, this could have been prevented, is that there's that tropical storm that's been going up the coast.
Mm-hmm.
So it's on its way. It's here. And I already knew about this. But one of my far windows, the rest of my building got new windows, except for my section, which is really annoying. But anyway, so not only does that far window have a big hole in the screen, but it's on the edge right by where one of the rain gutters is, and that section of the gutter is broken. So water basically just comes down in torrents there. And I knew the rain was coming, and it just started in the last few minutes, and I stupidly left part of that window open, so water got all over my windowsill, and it pooled around the floor down there by my lamp. So it's my own fault, because I knew the fucking rain was coming. And actually, if we're lucky, maybe we'll hear some thunder. We'll see. But anyway, sorry about that. People had to quickly take care of that. I should have known before I came out to close that damn window, but maybe I thought I did. But anyway, good thing I went and checked. Sorry.
This is not Dorian? Hurricane Dorian?
I think it's Aaron. Like not the male Aaron. The female Aaron, which would be Erin.
Oh.
I think it's Aaron. But yeah, we've had rain on and off earlier in the day, but now it's supposed to like really get going, and there's supposed to be thunder later, so we'll see.
You know, strangely enough, this is the 14th anniversary of Katrina.
I can't believe it was that long ago.
Hurricane Katrina, yeah.
Doesn't feel that long ago.
Mm-mm.
Man. Yeah, that was a really big one.
Mm-hmm.
I like leveled New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
All I could think in the wake of that was, the famous Canadian band, the Tragically Hip. One of their signature songs, which goes all the way back to like their first album from like 1987, is a song called "New Orleans is Sinking," and all I could think was, do they like not play that for a while because people think it's in bad taste?
I'm sure. Yeah, it took them like months to get back functional.
Yeah.
You know, around Bourbon Street area. I remember a friend of mine went down there, and they were like, "Yep, it's finally back to where it was." You know, it was all these businesses, lost a lot of revenue because they weren't able to be open around that time.
Yeah. Plus, there were businesses that just got destroyed.
Yeah.
So in a ways, they were kind of the lucky ones if they survived.
Looting going on.
Yeah, a lot of looting and stuff.
That's always whenever things get bad like that. You can count on.
Isn't it great to know that a terrible situation brings out the worst in some people?
People I heard a lot of people getting like raped and stuff inside the the Superdome they used to house some of the people there because people that didn't leave were in the middle of the thing, they couldn't get out. So
people really are getting worse, I think.
It's just like a flip, a switch flips or something.
Because I understand like the whole thing, like even back hundreds of years ago, there's this thing mob mentality, right?
Yeah.
Like if enough people are doing it, I can get away with it, or it's okay to do and stuff like that. But It doesn't always happen. Actually, one of the last things I watched on Netflix was about Woodstock. And one of the things that is not exaggerated and is absolutely true about the original Woodstock is how well behaved everybody was. They didn't, the whole thing was they had no idea so many people were going to show up. Almost 500,000 people were there, which was not what they planned for. So they didn't have enough food, they didn't have security, and
Right.
and they were pretty cool about it too, because when they realized when it was people had been showing up days before the concert was actually supposed to start, and they were still constructing stuff, and they came to a point where it's like, if this is going to start on time, we're going to use the materials we have. We can either finish this perimeter fence, or we can finish the stage. We can't do both. So they were just like, the only thing we can do is finish the stage, because without the stage, we got nothing. Right. So no fence. So they were like, so if people don't need tickets, they can just come. And they just announced this to everybody at one point. They just said, well, this is now a free concert, And yeah, for 3 days, even though they didn't plan for it. And the whole, there were people all over the country, and including in the town themselves, that had, even before it started, and when they had no idea how many people were going to show up, they didn't like the idea of it. They were like, not in our town and stuff. And there were people, talking about how much, how bad young people were and how shitty hippies were and stuff like that. But they really did prove the world wrong, because there were like no crimes.
And that could have gone south quickly.
Yeah. But basically, anytime they really needed people to do anything, they just basically, somebody took to the mic and said, okay, we need you to blah, 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 do this, please. And everybody just did. You know how many cops were at Woodstock? 8.
Not many. Oh, 8? Really? Wow.
And they weren't even there the whole time. Instead, their security force was that Wavy Gravy guy and his weird group. They were security. In which case, they didn't really do security, they just helped people. But anyway, and then you think the Woodstock of our generation, Woodstock 99, it was on the one hand, it was the opposite of Woodstock in that, it was, it was completely about making money, and not in the spirit of music and togetherness at all. If the walls came down there, the organizers wouldn't have said, this is a free concert. No, what they would have said is, get the fuck out and pay. And by the way, if you want water, it's $8 a bottle, and, all that shit. And then, of course, it ends with, a horrible, riot. Not like a riot, exactly. And then when it came out, there were, dozens of reports of sexual assaults and stuff. It's just my generation is disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, it was also a different time. That was probably sexual assaults at the first Woodstock, but, people probably didn't report it.
Yeah, there probably maybe a few, but I don't know. I don't think there were many. Like I said, when it came out, all these decades later, no one said anything about something like that, and there was no fights or anything.
Well, it's the type of people you're dealing with, too. You're dealing with, hippies that are, high, and then at Woodstock 99, it was, Rage Against the Machine fans.
Yeah.
The, people you would think are going to cause trouble,
Yeah. What's funny is even though people remember the big thing was about Limp Bizkit, and how Fred Durst had, egged them on, because at one point he's like, let out all that negative energy. That really wasn't that bad. That was just some hard moshing. The really bad stuff happened during the Red Hot Chili Peppers set, so... Well, go figure. I don't think that had much to do with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I think it was just the timing. By that time, it was towards the end, and things were, boiling over. But anyway, speaking of sexual assault, getting back to the point I was making about the movie. So it's weird. So he tells this guy, hey, I knew her. She gets off on the airplane. She's really into it. And he's like, all I have to do is get her in one. He's like, you're not a pilot. He's like, I don't need to fly. I just need to get her in one. Yeah. So anyway, that's his plan. He meets her. She remembers him. She's completely unimpressed by him. And this is where things get really turned into weird mood whiplash. So he starts using all these sexual double entendres about planes, right? About thrusts and all this crap. And she's laughing, and then she says, you know what? I don't care for your inappropriate remarks, blah blah blah. So just fuck off. She shuts him down. It's good for her, right? Not gonna put up with that. But then he does get her in the plane, and then she does start feeling it a little. But then since they can't go in the air, she's like, no. And then actually he listens to her. He backs right off. And at one point she just says, I can. She's like, my dad was an army drill instructor. He taught me how to defend myself. And he just says, just listen. And she punches him out. So it's kind of funny. So it shows, this is a very modern woman standing up for himself like that. But then later, she's everything he said she was. She's a big old plane slut. Because remember, he like fakes his way onto the base, tells the crazy guy who thinks that there's a secret base in Pomona, which of course doesn't exist. The guy that sees Japs everywhere, right? He's like, oh, they're everywhere. So there's another guy who's going to get court-martialed, because not only is he crazy, but he's got like a whole battalion with him. They're all following his crazy orders. Whereas like the Japs are everywhere. Anyway, this guy convinces him so he can get her in a plane, and a switch flips, and it becomes everything he said. She's a big old plane slut. He's like so scared because he's not really a pilot and he can't fly, and she's like straddling him and taking her clothes off, and he's like, "Are you kidding?" Like, this has become serious for him now. Like, he was the horn dog, but now he realizes they're in a serious situation. And all she wants is for him to, like, give it to her while they're flying. So I just thought that was interesting. Because they present it like, he's kind of a chauvinist and he's got this plan for her, and she's not going to put up with it. But then it turns out, no, she's totally... Not only is she exactly what he said, she's so much so that it's, like, scares him. So I just thought that was an odd thing to do with the character. But anyway, I thought their arc was the worst arc. I thought they were the least interesting, couldn't give a crap about them. And then they have a whole thing where when they're flying, where stupid Belushi's character is convinced that they're the Japanese plane he's been following. He shoots them down, and then later he gets shot down by the guys on the Ferris wheel. Big colossal fuck up.
They crash in the tar pits.
And they crash in the tar pits. But anyway, so there were a lot of different stories and points of view. I thought theirs was the worst one. Like, I did not care about them. I didn't like them. I thought that whole revelation was really stupid because it went against what they were setting up. It's like, oh yeah, she's just a big slut. The guy's completely right. Like, she doesn't like him at all. But once he gets her in a plane, like, she becomes like a nymphomaniac. I thought that was stupid. And So, there's a lot of different storylines, but I thought theirs was the worst, I'd have to say.
What was her character's name? Was it Betty?
No, Betty was Wally's girlfriend. That was the one that the other guy was chasing around.
It's not many females in this film. Maxine?
I think it was Nancy Allen's character.
Oh, was it really? Okay.
Donna Stratton.
Okay.
Yeah, because the one that played Betty was Diane Kay, who I don't know anything about. Apparently she was on the sitcom 8 is Enough, which is something I've heard of, but I don't know what it actually is. But yeah, I thought that was a weird case. And I thought they sucked. Like, the other characters, I didn't really particularly like any of the characters. Like, any of the characters were particularly interesting or funny. But I didn't really dislike them, but I disliked those two. And I also just disliked their arc. It was stupid and boring, and I didn't care. So yeah, Captain Wild Bill Kelso. I mean, I guess he's wild. And it's a weird ending, too, because he winds up on the sub, and he just has his usual swagger and bravado. He's like, turn this tub around, we're going to Tokyo. It's like, even in the context of this wacky movie, we still set some things are serious, so they were going to, capture you or execute you. That's the end of your arc, Bill, because guess what? You're not going to commandeer the sub, and if you take it to Tokyo, what are you going to do? So, I don't know. It's like the movie painted itself into a corner and then just sort of ends. All this stuff happens, he winds up on the sub, and then, as if to, sum it up, Robert Stack character just goes, this is going to be a long war. And that's the end. And you're right, and you're like, yes, it will be a long war if this is that you guys have. Which I guess is funny, but again, I don't think it's funny in the way the movie intended it to be funny. What's weird is Spielberg had actually talked to Kubrick about this movie before he made it, and Kubrick said, yeah, you can do a World War II movie, but a drama would be better, and he was like, no, comedy all the way. But yeah, besides the whole thing with Duel, of course, the movie opens with a parody of his successful movie to date, Jaws. It's even the same actress. That whole thing about the woman going out for a swim and the music coming up and stuff, and it turning out to be the sub. That's the same actress that was the initial character killed by Jaws in the movie.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of interesting, considering, Jaws was only a few years old at the time, but I guess it was already a classic. And I thought, yeah. Although I guess it makes more sense in a way. Maybe it does make more sense in that they were being current. Because I mean, how many times nowadays do we see like movies referencing other movies, and it's so dated because like nobody cares anymore. It's like people making like Matrix jokes and stuff. So, I really don't know what the smart thing to do about that is. Either they were being current and might have been worried about becoming dated, or they just knew Jaws was so fucking classic that it would never be dated. Because everybody knows and loves Jaws. I don't know. In any case, it's fine. It's an interesting enough opening. It's like, oh, it's a Japanese sub. Didn't see that coming. And then I'm not really sure what happens because again I don't know the dialogue, but I guess this is where they're talking about taking out an honorable target, and of course one of the Japanese is like super thrilled for the first time probably to ever see a white person, and he gets to see like a naked blonde American. But yeah, the movie's just so full of slapstick that I think is flat and not very good. Because like the movie basically, as I said, is a comedy of errors on a grand scale. And part of me makes me wonder, maybe a comedy of errors doesn't work on a grand scale. Maybe a comedy of errors are much better when they're just the small things they started as. Because this movie's main source for humor is kind of like one of the oldest sources for humor we have, which is misunderstandings and mistaken identity. Like, look up like any like classic comedy from like a few hundred years ago, or even into the early 20th century, and that's all it is. Like every fucking play you've ever heard of that's a great comedy, that's what it is. It's somebody shows up somewhere, somebody thinks they're somebody else, and treats them differently based on that, and that's where all the comedy comes from. Even fucking Shakespeare did it. It's so full of mistaken identity and characters impersonating each other and stuff like that. It's all over the place. And this is kind of the same thing. We don't have anybody impersonating anybody in this movie exactly, but you have people just mistaking people. It's like, the whole thing is the war paranoia. The Japanese are coming. Turns out there are some Japanese, but they start seeing them everywhere, and yeah, they shoot down their own planes. You know, they're shooting at each other all the time. Everybody's just comedy of errors. It's just people like making mistakes, and I guess hilarity ensues, but it doesn't quite work.
Well, it's a comedy that's not funny.
Yeah.
And
That's even what Spielberg said at the end. He said, all these years later, like, I don't dislike the movie. I think the movie's well done in a lot of ways. It just wasn't funny enough. And he's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think your mic switched again.
I'm losing you. I can't hear you. I don't know about the audience, but I'm not hearing you. You're low. I don't seem to hear anything now.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. It's a bit faint, though.
Yes,
You sound kind of far away.
I'm getting an echo.
Oh, shit. An echo when you talk or when I talk?
When I talk.
Oh, that's weird.
I don't know if it's
So
showing.
yeah,
up on the
I don't know
screen.
how the audience is hearing it, but for me, you're faint.
We're sorry, it's hard to talk when I hear that echo. Yeah, we've had a lot of technical difficulties tonight, guys.
Yeah, we had difficulty just launching this thing. For a while, I couldn't get my browser to recognize it. Then I couldn't get my browser to allow my mic or camera to work.
See, I can hear all of your, like, what you're hearing in your headphones. As I hear that clicking noise now that you were talking about.
It's funny because I don't think I've heard it in a while. Either that or I just haven't noticed. But yeah, I hear you, but you're lower.
Well, I guess we can go ahead and try to wrap up then. This is,
Oh yeah, there it is. I don't know. I still like the movie. I think it would have been like it was 2.5 hours cut down to 2 hours. I think they could have even cut it down to 1.5, and that would have made it better. Um, I guess you can't eliminate any of the storylines, even the one I don't like. You can't eliminate it because it still affects the others, so you have to keep it in. So I mean, so still, even editing it down isn't going to save the movie, and it's not going to make unfunny jokes or unfunny situations funnier, but it would at least make the movie flow better, I think. Like I said, what's funny is the way it is in this form is like the first hour is mostly set up, and the second hour is almost complete action. But that's more what I would cut. Because I feel like a lot of it is drawn out and goes on too long. Is really how it felt. Like the part where the couple are up in the airplane and, oh, they're going to crash, and Captain What's-His-Name sees them and stuff. Like, that's too long. You can make that go quicker. And a few other things like that. I realize that when you have an ensemble thing with a lot of characters, you don't want things to be too quick, because then you're just constantly jumping around. And I realize that doesn't flow well either. So I don't really have a solution for exactly, but I still feel like cutting it down at least a bit more, maybe even 15 minutes taken out of it, would have helped. Again, still doing that, you can't make unfunny parts funny. I mean, it's like they wanted us to believe all this stuff about Belushi's character. And I guess it was supposed to be funny, but it just makes it seem like a lunatic instead of funny. Because he's just this soldier who's AWOL and just thinks he's always going to win and stuff. And then in the end, it's kind of ridiculous. He's captured. He's like, I've got the drop on you. You're going to take me to Tokyo, and I'm going to win the war. It's like, this guy is, yeah, he is crazy. Yeah. But maybe in a way that's like more uncomfortable than funny. Did you catch the bit where, like, I think it's a Buster Keaton reference or something, like where during the big riot, just before the tank comes, when the riot is spilled out into the streets and everything's fucking up, and there's like, I don't know, it's like a fire truck comes by and a big ladder comes, and the ladder smashes a guy through a window. Anyway, very quickly you'll see when he lands inside, he smashes through the window of a restaurant, and he lands right in front of a table, and and there's a guy sitting at the table eating spaghetti. That's Belushi again, dressed up like Marlon Brando, basically based on when he would do sketches of him on Saturday Night Live. Like, they thought they should stick that in the movie. It's kind of funny, I guess. I mean, again, it's not going to save anything. But...
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of Animal House. The look of it and the pacing. But Animal House is actually a good movie.
Yeah. Animal House is actually my favorite comedy. It is my very favorite comedy. So to me, yeah, everything in Animal House works really well. It is really funny. Yeah, I mean, I guess it does. It's trying to go for sort of the same atmosphere as Animal House, I think. That sort of wacky anything goes thing. But that, and I'm not saying that can't work in like a war movie, because like I said, you can make a wacky sort of war movie, sure, but it doesn't land. And it's a lot easier for Animal House too, because it's like, it's 1962 and it's hijinks on a campus, It's an easier thing. So this movie, again, I think is sort of somewhat undone by its ambition. There's a lot going on. Again, the effects are really good. The action stuff is really good. I do think the really self-indulgent scene in the movie that with the big musical thing, I think that's the best part. I think he pulls that off really well, actually. But the rest of the movie around it isn't interesting enough, really, and it's one of the few movies where I've seen, like, we've all seen comedies, that weren't really funny for us, and we're like, that's just stupid, or that's just lame. This is one of the only comedies I can think of where I didn't really think that, but I just felt like you can see them trying so hard to be funny, and it's just not working. Like, it's almost how I felt. Like the setup they're giving these characters and the weird quirks and stuff, and yet they don't have lines that are funny or things that are that funny. They have things that are mildly funny, like there's something that might really happen in real life. I think that's another thing too. The movie is really wacky, but yet it's really hard for me to put into words. I don't know. You'll have some big, like, crazy thing happen, but then the character's reaction to it doesn't match it. It's not funny enough or something. I don't know. I'm trying to think of any good lines. I don't know if this is a good line, but I thought this was an interesting line. So there's a part where, after I'll admit, another really entertaining sequence is
when after Dan Aykroyd's character gets knocked on the head and nobody knows how to drive the tank. I mean, what other movie are you going to get to see a World War II era tank smashing its way through a paint factory? I mean, that looks really cool and stuff. But anyway, so it's like after that, and a bunch of the characters get paint on them. One of the guys gets covered in black paint, whereas the only black character in the entire movie, one of the soldiers, gets covered in white paint. And the guy like says something to about how pale he is now, and the other guy says, and the black guy covered in white paint now says to him, "Get to the back of the tank." Like, it's a segregation joke, I guess. And I guess it's cool that they went there.
Yeah. You remember the South Park movie?
Oh yeah.
They had Operation Get Behind the Darkies.
Yeah. Did you ever hear the Emancipation Proclamation? I don't listen to hip hop. Yeah. And there's another weird joke about the guy's blackness too, because there's a part where like when all the shit's hitting the fan and everything's going nuts and stuff, when Robert Stack's character appears on the scene, he's like, "What's going on here?" And like all these people go flying by, and he's like, "What is that?" And the guy says, "It's this, sir." And at one point, I can't remember what happens, but somebody goes flying past, and he's like, "What is that?" And and the whole joke is, you're supposed to be focusing on whatever the weird thing is, but instead he focuses on the fact that one of the people that ran by is the black guy. It's like, "It appears to be a Negro, sir," or something like that. Again, I find that funny, but I don't think it's the way it was intended in the movie. I think it was funny because it's so weird, but anyway. There's one more Negro joke in it, and that's where, like, it cuts, after the whole riot has spilled out into the streets, it cuts back to the radio host guy that was doing the play-by-play talking about the dance contest, where the whole place is flattened and destroyed, and there's some, like, unconscious people on the floor. At this point, what's his name is unconscious, the bad soldier, Treat Williams. But anyway, where he's like trying to tell the audience, well, this was a pretty crazy thing and stuff like that, but I guess you got your money's worth. And at one point he goes, maybe next year for this we can invite some Negroes over and we'll have a race riot. I don't know. But, yeah, so they made the best use they could of having one black character, I guess. I get it. It's 1941.
Yeah,
Being black then was pretty novel. Is one way of putting it. Oh, have you frozen?
Oh, I'm frozen.
Oh, okay. I can still hear you. I can't see you, but I can hear you. Okay, so at least I can hear you. That's good. But yeah, if things are just getting worse on your end, I guess we'll have to call this one early, unfortunately.
Yeah. I didn't care for this film before, and I didn't tell you that because I was hoping I would enjoy it more so. There, it's gone now.
Holy shit! You know why I couldn't hear you the last few minutes? That was my fault.
So
I had the microphone jack was out of it.
Okay.
And that's why you were hearing an echo. Part of it was
Yeah.
coming out of my exterior speaker. I apologize. That was my fucking fault.
That's why you're not hearing the clicking noise too, or you weren't. You are.
Yeah, because what happened was my audio was split between the speakers and I was still getting a little in the headphones. Well, shit.
I think I'm having mic issues, guys. I'm gonna have to see if I can get another mic in here and see if it works any better.
Yeah. At least I can hear you now. Jeez, that was my own damn fault, that part.
And I apologize for the clicking sound in the background. See, I could hear that through your end. So I figured out what you were talking about. And anyway, I guess we can talk about that later. But
I feel like we're hearing it a lot less than the last episode we did. The last episode was full of it, and I just sort of powered through it, and I don't think you could hear it at the time. I haven't heard it as much in this episode, but that might just partially be because of the way I fucked up my own headphones for the last few minutes. I don't know.
But yeah, I didn't care for this film before when I had seen it, and I really didn't get much out of it seeing it again. But I didn't want to tell you that just because I figured, sometimes I watch things I've seen before and feel differently about them. So.
Well, yeah, I know what you mean. Well, what I feel disappointed about is that I can't convey is, like, I'm not really sure why I still like it, because I don't know, the bad things definitely outweigh the good. Because more what I guess I appreciate about the movie is sort of like what it tried to do, even though I know it didn't accomplish it. I guess it's just mostly because I kind of appreciate the premise again, it doesn't deliver on the premise, but I still kind of like the premise. It's almost like it suggests a movie that would be good, even though it's not actually that good. I don't know. It's
Well, I
really
mean,
hard for me to articulate.
on paper, it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And it's something I feel like I should like. I just don't.
No, I mean, I get why you wouldn't, because a lot of the scenes just are flat and uninteresting. And it's a lot of the times it feels like it's trying really hard to do something, and it's not getting there at all. And it feels like a waste of a lot of these actors and stuff, because we know most of them can be more entertaining than they're being in this movie. I don't know, the movie has like a weird tone. Like, it's always supposed to be like wacky and over the top, and yet in some places it doesn't get there. It doesn't seem to be. I don't know. It's really hard. Like, I've thought a lot about it, even because I watched it last week and I watched it again today, and I still do enjoy it. I enjoyed it a bit more this time because there were parts that I just sort of fast forwarded through, so that will help you. Specifically, I was like, I'm not going to get anything out of watching, the Japanese speak when I don't know what they're saying. So I went through those scenes, and also I went through the scenes of those two characters I said I didn't like, because I was like, I'm not going to learn anything new from them. So maybe that's another reason why I liked it a little bit more, was because I kind of skipped over the stuff I didn't like. But again, it's a Spielberg film. It looks good. It sounds good. People always talk about John Williams' various awesome themes, and he nails it movie after movie. He nails it in this movie, too. The main theme of this movie is great and fits it perfectly, I think.
Yeah.
It's like just as fitting as like the Star Wars or Indiana Jones theme, really. Like, it's not as iconic, but I think it fits the movie really well. Like, it just shows that John Williams, he was like in a zone. You just say, here's the movie, here's the spirit of the movie. Do you think you could come up with like a main theme that like encapsulates the entire look and feel of the movie? Oh, sure. Boom, and he does it. Like, every time. Great sets and costumes and effects, and like you said, use of miniatures. Some cool, authentic World War II type stuff. The planes, the tank, uniforms, etc. I mean, all that really works and looks good. That kind of saves the movie a bit, too, because, I mean, if the movie didn't, like, look good or something, then yeah, like, what the hell. But it's funny, like, for a movie that's not that entertaining, you can still see, like, where the budget went.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily feel like it was wasted.
I could see the budget being higher than it actually was.
Yeah. Well, again, you have to, I guess, adjust for dollars, whatever. This is 1979, so...
Well, sure, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this had the backing of two major studios, Columbia and Universal. And, as we said towards the beginning, Spielberg was riding high, and he felt he could do no wrong, so you understand why he wanted to do something sort of ambitious. And, I mean, he picks himself right up afterward and makes some great, awesome movies right after it. I mean, his career's proved that, like, he's really awesome director. Some people will say one of the best of all time. In fact, what's funny is, like, whenever you talk about, like, best directors, Spielberg's, like, the main thing that counts against Spielberg is his own success. It's almost like, well, he's so commercially successful, he's, like, probably actually not that good,
Yeah. No, I mean, even, I haven't seen all of his recent films, but, pretty much everything I've seen in the past decade has been decent.
Yeah.
I haven't seen War Horse.
Me neither.
I haven't seen the last one that came out with, I think Meryl Streep or somebody was in it.
I haven't seen most of his last few movies. I remember, like, a couple years ago on the Sausage Factory, we did a show about him, and I was trying to think about, like, where exactly did I stop seeing his movies? And that would have just been around, like, the last movie of his I saw until recently, because in the last few months I saw Ready Player One, which I was prepared to hate, and actually I thought was okay. Like, I don't, it's not really for me, it's for people a bit younger than me, I think.
Yeah.
And stuff, but I mean, it's not as bad as I was expecting. It has some good parts in it, like, it didn't blow me away. But anyway, if you discount that, like, the last thing I saw of his was The Adventures of Tintin, which I thought was a pretty decent adaptation, but was actually a flop. That was a flop. But that's not really because the movie was bad, because I didn't realize this, because growing up I always knew who Tintin was because of the cartoon. I didn't know Americans didn't really know who Tintin was. Like, I didn't know that. And what's funny is, like, it's not like I knew him because I was, like, a big fan of Franco-Belgian comics comics when I was a kid. I get why people over here don't really know Franco-Belgian comics. I just happen to have been exposed to the cartoon adaptation, which was actually a partially Canadian production. So that's why I knew. But anyway, I do like Tintin, and actually I collect the comics. They're pretty bland adventure stories, but they're good stuff. And the movie's pretty good. But yeah, so... Well, he did a whole bunch. Like I said, Warhorse, Lincoln, Bridge of Spies, the BFG, the Post. Yeah, he did all those, and I haven't seen any of them.
Yeah, the Post is the one I was thinking of. I haven't seen yet. I did see Bridge of Spies, and it's okay.
I wanted to see it, and then I just sort of forgot about it. I feel like it's hard because maybe I would feel differently if I'd seen some of those movies. So there's just a big gap in the last almost 10 years of movies I see. But I feel like his last really good movie was Munich. I remember that I particularly blabbed about that movie when we did the show on it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can't really call it truly great because the movie has moments that really drag. But I feel like the parts that are good are really good. And I also felt like it was a very daring movie to do because it was so controversial. And of course, it was one of the few times in his career. It's funny, he makes a Holocaust movie and everybody praises the hell out of him. But he makes this movie and he's getting, torn apart from all different sides. There were all these different sides, that would normally fight each other. But they were in agreement and that they would attack him for this movie. And I'm not saying the movie's perfect or anything, but I like the movie. And I think the last great movie he did, and this is somewhat controversial, is his follow-up to AI. Actually, I like both of them. I really like Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report. I love those. I love both those movies. Those both came out in 2002. I feel like those were his last truly great movies.
Yeah, I rewatched Minority Report, I think, when we did that show on Spielberg, and yeah, that's a great movie.
That movie really holds up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah. Really great look and style. I mean, the only reason... I guess you could dislike the movie if you really don't like Tom Cruise, but I'm fine with Tom Cruise. It's a pretty good... It's a good enough role for him. It's one of those roles where you don't have to do very much. You're just sort of, okay, you're a protagonist guy, and you're kind of the hero, and, there's not too much to your character. The main thing to his character is kind of a cliche. It's, what was it? He, lost his wife and son or something. Which is, tragic backstory, which is, a cliche for so many, main characters. But, yeah, I think that's a really awesome movie that... I was super surprised a few years ago. I knew I liked it, but, just how well it holds up now. It still looks really good. And everything. Yeah, And Catch Me If You Can, I adored when it came out. And I don't love it the way I used to, but it's still a really good movie. But I remember Catch Me If You Can is one of the first movies I bought on DVD. I was really happy to own it because I really liked it. And I haven't. It's one of the movies I lost in my famous burglary, and I never replaced it.
Yeah, it's right around that period of time. He was making lots of good movies.
But yeah, if we're going to talk about absolute classics, it'd be Jaws, Close Encounters, Raiders, E.T. Then you can make arguments at least about the Indiana Jones first two sequels, not the last one. But Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. For me, Last Crusade is the greatest movie of all time. Blah blah blah. Color Purple is, I don't know if it's an absolute classic, but people really love it. People, and it's of course I love Empire of the Sun, but it doesn't count. Hook's a weird one, in that there's a certain group of people that see it as a classic, and there's a certain group of people that just see it as weird and off-putting. And what's weird is I kind of shifted from one group to the other. I used to really like Hook, and now I can barely stand it.
Yeah, man. I don't know if it's maybe for people younger than us.
I was the target age when it came out. Basically, I was 8 or 9 years old.
Oh yeah.
So, and I actually saw it in theater. As I said, 1991 is wasn't the first time I saw movies as early as I think 1987 in the theater. But 91 was sort of the first time where going to the theater was really a thing for me, and then it became normal in my life. And the two big ones were both late in the year. They were Hook and Beauty and the Beast. Those are movie-going experiences I remember vividly, even though they were a long time ago. But yeah, I've seen Hook 1,000 times. It goes on TV all the time.
Yeah.
And I usually check in for it. But in the last few years, I've started to really, first it was oh, that's a fun movie. I really enjoy that movie too. It's not holding up to. Wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that's
Oh,
weird
man.
and annoying.
I hadn't watched it in years until maybe a year or so ago. I was watching with my kids, and like they checked out pretty early on. Couldn't give a fuck.
Wow.
And I mean, oh man, it was just so boring. Like in the middle, after he goes back, and there's like another hour after that. It's so, oh man.
I don't know if I find it boring, but I've just found like a lot of the choices are a lot stranger than I originally thought they were, and some of them are just damn off-putting. And when people talk about like him being overly sentimental, this movie's a perfect example of it.
Hmm.
The worst bit probably of all the sentimentality in the movie, and I mean there's a bunch, but for me the worst part is there's a part where like basically smack in the middle of the movie where like it's the part where Hook has started turning Jack to his side, where it's like, oh, now Jack like likes Hook, is gonna treat him like the dad because he was a shitty dad. But the point is like the younger sister, like she never wavers, like she doesn't fall for it at all. There's a part where, like, at nighttime, she's, like, out on the bow of the ship, and she sings this really stupid song, and all the pirates listen to her glassy-eyed. I'm like, this is awful. Like, what the hell? Like, she wasn't even a good singer. I don't want to pick on some little girl, but if you're going to stick an actress in a movie and have her sing, she should actually be able to sing. But it's a really awkward, weird song. She can't sing, and the idea that she's just singing this song, and all the pirates are just, like, watching her is really stupid. But yeah, that's the one that stands out for me as like really schlocky.
I feel like there's a lot of like sexual, sexual, I guess, undertones in there.
Well, he's like making out with mermaids at one point.
Yeah, I
There's this
mean,
whole thing that Tink always wanted to be big enough so she could bang him.
yeah.
Well, for
That
me,
kind of
Tink is
stuff.
the worst part of the movie. I never liked Julia Roberts. I
Yeah.
don't like her in anything anyway. To this, I think is a horrible, stupid casting choice. I was like, I realize that like you're gonna adapt something. It doesn't have to be bang on. But the whole point of Tink was, even though she hung out with the Lost Boys, was like she wasn't one of them. She wasn't boyish. She wasn't a tomboy. She was kind of like the one before Wendy showed up. She was like the one thing, the one I'm losing articulation, the one symbol or the one representation of like femininity. And that's why she resented Wendy when Wendy showed up, because she was the girl. But in this, she's just a short-haired tomboy going, oh, we're going to play forever and spit on the pirates and gosh, gee, Willikers, and like she's one of the Lost Boys. I'm like, no, Tink is different from the Lost Boys. By the way, I'm not a huge Peter Pan fan, and yet I'm still feeling like I have to go, no! This is not true to the source material. It's not like I love that story. It's fine. It's a good story.
Yeah.
But, anyway, I don't
Quite
want
a
to
bit of
harp too much.
artistic freedom with that story, I
I
think.
just thought it was awful. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, of all the scenes in the movie, that's the worst, probably. It's this random one where she just wishes herself big for 2 seconds so she could tell him that she always wanted to fuck him, and then they just have, like, and then she shrinks down again, and
Yeah.
she's also super overpowered too. She's like Mighty Mouse. He even says at one point, "Are you related to Mighty Mouse?" Because it's like, yeah, apparently you could just win this war all by yourself. But anyway, we don't want to turn this into a whole thing about Hook. But going on, Jurassic Park again, huge, absolute classic. One of my favorite movies. There's Schindler's List. Enough said.
I
Saving
think,
Private Ryan is probably the next one.
yeah, that's a great film.
And then we get into the more iffy stuff of the early 2000s where it becomes debatable.
Well, like around Jurassic Park time, I think that's when everybody realized like this dude is a top tier level director.
And I mean, look at all the different sorts of movies he's
Right,
done too.
right.
He's doing like Jurassic Park is an adventure film, but it's also a sci-fi film. I mean, it's not like cyberpunk, but it's still a sci-fi. Yeah,
It's like the ultimate family film, like where the entire family can enjoy the film. You don't have very many of those anymore, really.
yeah. And what's funny is when he strayed out of that territory, people didn't like it, like Empire of the Sun.
In Munich,
You know, Munich, yeah. But what's funny is towards the beginning of the show, I think it was Kenny asked if we'd seen Always, which is maybe his, I think, like most obscure movie,
I haven't seen it.
and I haven't seen it. But what I was thinking of, yeah, I'd like to see it. Is I don't know if we'll do any more of his movies for the show or not. Only time will tell. I mean, we've done 3 at this point, but I mean, again, it's been a couple years since we did the other 2, so. But a movie that I've never seen that again stands out as like I think a legitimate flop was Amistad. Wasn't Amistad an actual flop? The one about the slave ship?
It's not a bad movie, but it may
Yeah.
have flopped.
I have never seen it.
It's like
And what's funny is it's super under the radar for me. I have no memory of it ever happening. It's something that just sprang into existence for me a few years ago. I was like, he did a movie in the late 90s about like a slave ship? I have no memory of that at all. And I mean, I was paying attention to his career at the time. You know,
wow.
this is just a year before. This is 97. This is the same year he did Lost World Jurassic Park, and the year before he did Saving Private Ryan. So it's not like he'd been gone for a while or anything. Like, he was always a super productive guy. He never had long breaks between movies, and Amistad was part of it. I think the first time I even knew Amistad existed was I saw some like weird parody of it in like it's in one of the Scary Movies.
Oh gosh.
They,
Wow.
in one of the Scary Movies, they go to the theater and they see like and they see a preview for Amistad 2 or something, where like one of the Wayans brothers is on the ship and he's like, "I'm
Yeah.
the king of the world." Then suddenly
Yeah.
they start whipping him and they're like, "Amistad
Yeah.
2." Like, I didn't know what that was I didn't know what that was a reference to. I was like, "Amistad 2? What's Amistad 1?" Like, yeah. So I don't know. I'd like to see that. I don't know if it's worth doing a show about. Maybe. But I want to see it because I've never seen it, and I think, well, partially because it was a black spot for me. Like, not only have I not seen it,
Literally.
it says here it had a budget of 36 million and a box office of 44.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
pretty close to flop.
I mean, but don't you put an ad budget of you basically doubled the budget?
Yeah, when you get to like advertising and stuff.
Isn't that the formula?
I mean, it has the normal formula. John Williams did the music for this, and it had big stars: Anthony Hopkins, Morgan Freeman. Matthew McConaughey was at least on his way to becoming a star in it.
He was
So-
big into doing like fun movies and then just a downer, like Hook, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List.
Yeah.
You know, Jurassic Park 2, Amistad.
I know. So it's like Amistad and Saving Private Ryan is like kind of a double whammy because they were back to back. Because
Yeah.
usually, yeah, he would like have like a more fun, lighthearted movie. But yeah, that's like his one time of like doing a more serious thing. I really do like Saving Private Ryan, but I always, and it's kind of not fair because, you know, you shouldn't define movies by how they compare to another movie. You need, you know, but I always define it how it compares to The Thin Red Line. And it's not like I want to, and I think The Thin Red Line is better, but but they're both really different movies about different things, even though they're World War II. So I'm glad they both exist. So it's not like me
Yeah.
saying you shouldn't watch. So I'm not like one of those people that say, "Oh no, you shouldn't watch Saving Private Ryan." What you should watch is Thin Red Line. No, I think you should watch them both. I just happen to prefer Thin Red Line.
Terrence Malick.
Yeah, that might be my favorite Terrence Malick film. We haven't done any of his movies, so that's maybe a possibility.
yeah.
Although a lot of it would just be me gushing, I realize, because I'm a big
We're
fan
just
of.
saying how good it looks.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, he's really like a cinematographer that directs. You know.
He really is. But I mean, the good news is he's had, you know, it's not like he hasn't had good help with it. You know, he's had good actors giving good performances and fairly good scripts and stuff. So
Did you see the one he did with was it Brad Pitt? I can't remember.
The Tree of Life.
Did you like that?
It's one of those movies where I thought I would love it,
Yeah.
and I didn't, but I still like it.
It's something I need to revisit because
I mean, it's
I-
easily his like most pretentious movie for
Yeah.
somebody that probably would, you know, be accused of being overly pretentious. Like that's him just going full on.
Mhm.
I do like it, but it's one of those movies. It was kind of like there's a few movies like that. It's like I remember seeing previews for Big Fish, and I was like, oh, wonderful. I saw the movie. I like Big Fish. I like that movie. I still
Yeah.
like it, but it still, I thought I was gonna love it, and I didn't.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And that it was kind of the same thing with Tree of Life. I was like, oh yeah, I'm ready for this. You know, Terrence Malick and all philosophical stuff. Like, oh yeah, give it to me. And I do like it, and I'd like to watch it again too. But couldn't quite love it the way I was expecting to or hoping to.
Yeah. Just a lot of waxing poetic.
Yeah. And I mean, I like that if it's done right. And I realize that when people say, well, how do you do it right? I mean, no, there's not one way. So, you know,
I mean, I like it too when it's done right and not overly done. But
yeah. And I realize that's a hard line to walk, you know.
Mhm.
So, but, no, I do enjoy it, but not quite on the level I was hoping to. But I feel like I'm at a loss. I feel like it was one of the times where I failed the audience because I can't articulate exactly why I still like 1941 because it's so much easier for me to identify what's wrong with it than what's right with it. It's so tangible and clear, the mistakes and the problems, and I can pick them all out. But if I have to talk about like what I thought was good about it, beyond like presentation, I can't say why I still kind of like it. I don't know. It's just one of those films, I guess. Like I'm not sorry we did it. I'm glad we watched it, and I got enjoyment out of it. And again, I mean, it's a kind of a disappointing thing to say, but it's almost like I just really like the movie for what it tries to be, even though it doesn't succeed in it. It's almost like I just sort of imagine a better movie in my head. Like, this is a good setup. This is, some good actors and stuff, And maybe in my head, I imagine, like, how it could have been instead of what actually is on the screen. I don't know. It's kind of weird. And I realize it's kind of a anticlimactic thing to say.
Didn't you originally want to include that in the we did films that flop but are actually good?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was more the idea of examining flops and just saying, like,
Yeah.
were they actually good, and getting to
Oh,
the
yeah.
heart of why they were flops. I mean, that's something we like to do on the show. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things we have done a few times. Not just with Spielberg, but sometimes, yeah, looking at a film that maybe flopped or is lesser known and saying, was that right, or what were the circumstances that led to it? Because it's funny, there's always weird outside circumstances that happen sometimes, like, years later, we don't take into account because we're not thinking about it. Like, a weird random example is, like, I really like the movie The Frighteners. I think that's a really good movie.
Yeah.
That movie did terribly. And there's a few reasons why, and you can understand in watching it. But some of it is just historical context that you realize. One of the reasons that movie did so poorly is because it came out the same weekend that the Summer Olympics started. That's not really anybody's fault. Like, people are going to watch the Summer Olympics, not necessarily run out to the theater on the same day, because
Right.
that's a big draw. That could happen to any movie. So
Well,
that's something that, like, you don't really know.
The Thing flopped, and
Yeah.
it's widely renowned as one of the
Yeah.
best horror films ever made.
And again, I think with the Thing that's easier. I mean, there's a lot of factors, and we can't just sum it all up like this. But I think the closest you can come to summing it up, if I was going to say, what's the main reason why a really good movie like The Thing, why did it flop? I would have to say it was ahead of its time. That's the simplest thing I can say. There's obviously more there's obviously more complexities, and
Yeah.
but I feel like that's the main reason. People hadn't seen anything like it. They had sort of no frame of reference, nothing to compare it to, that
It
kind of
must have
thing.
just not been marketed correctly because there was an audience for that stuff.
And that's another thing with a movie that is so unique. Is
Yeah.
like when it's coming out for the first time, people don't know how to market it.
Yeah.
That even not that The Frighteners is super unique, but again, there was a marketing issue there. If I'm bringing that up again, one is the poster showed nothing. The poster was just like a white thing. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I realize you can't just get everything from a poster, but still, that's part of it. And the other is that was a movie that it was a comedy, but it also was dark and serious and kind of. When you have a weird tone issue, they don't know how to market it either.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it too. So I think that goes back into something with
Like
The
a
Thing.
horror comedy.
Like The Thing, yeah, it's a horror movie. It's a blend of sci-fi and horror, and that had been done before. But when they had blended sci-fi and horror before, it was always sort of cheesy and not really that scary because you're going back to like B stuff from the 50s. This is the first time, really, maybe the second time since Alien. Like Alien's maybe the first time where they really blend horror and sci-fi, hard horror, hard sci-fi, great combination, great result. I think The Thing is kind of the same way, but it's in many ways a less obvious movie than Alien. Even though on the surface they sound kind of like the same idea. One is crew out in space encounters an alien. The other is crew in remote part of the Earth encounters alien. And yet they're super different. And
Yeah, I love the slow burn of The Thing.
yeah,
Like, where it amps up to when the shit hits the fan and it's pretty much, gung ho for the rest of the movie.
yeah,
But, yeah, the pacing's great.
yeah. No, love that movie, and I'm so happy. I bring it up a few times, I guess, because I don't buy movies at the same
Yeah.
pace I used to, and stuff. It's like that was a movie where I just sat like this for like a decade and said, I'm not buying it, not buying it, not buying it because something better will come out. And then finally, like this crazy like Shout Factory 3 disc edition comes out in like a or at least here in a what are those things I like Steelbook and stuff. And I'm like, now I'll buy it. So I
think
bought
I
it.
only have 2 copies of the thing on Blu-ray, but I had, I think maybe 3 on DVD.
Yeah, see, and I did not want to do that. Because I was like, there's some, like, ultimate way better edition coming.
Yeah.
I know there is. Like, and I dug in my heels, and I'm glad I waited. And I
But
mean,
that
I still
was-
paid a lot for it, but...
That was like my show-off Blu-ray for like how good the technology is and how good the display and the
What's really funny
transfer.
is one of the things I like best about my edition is that it includes the heavily edited made-for-TV version, which is, like, cuts out all sorts of stuff, adds weird narration, and also, like, they don't do the transfer at all, so it just basically looks like some shitty, like, VHS from the 80s. I just kind of enjoy the novelty of it. Like, I really liked watching it.
That's
even though
probably the first way I saw it.
Yeah.
Actually,
the narration is hilarious.
who is it? Kirk Douglas? I mean, Kurt. Russell?
No, it's not. It's somebody who was in the movie at all, because the narration isn't like real narration. Like, there's a part where, remember at the very beginning, there's like a caption that says where they are. It's like something base Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, he reads that to the audience in case we're too stupid to read it. And then it's not really exactly narration. What it is as soon as a character is introduced, he gives like a few like quick sentences talking about who they are. He'll be like this is completely made up, but it'll be like Kirk, I don't know, a wild pilot from blah 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 with a chip on his
Fuck,
shoulder.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something like that. So, like, there's at least 5 or 6 characters. When they're introduced, he very quickly, like, gives a few, like, lines of exposition about them. So it's not even, like, real narration. It's just, for some reason, him giving us backstory that we don't need. Or just
When
so
he's-
we know their names.
When he's playing the computer chess,
Yeah,
that's when it's doing the narration.
I think so. Like I
Yeah.
said, it does it, like, 5 or 6 times. Every time a character shows up for the
fuck.
first time, he does, like, a little quick introduction.
That's so stupid.
But I really enjoyed it. Again, I realize that, it's a stupid butchering of the movie, but I enjoy having access to it, I
Yeah.
guess is what it is. And, yeah. So that's pretty cool. But anyway, I guess we'll wrap up because we've strayed on to other things. But, I mean, I think this episode was a success considering what we had to overcome. We're sorry about the technical difficulties and me running out of the room to save my apartment and stuff. And we've had some technical difficulties, and I do feel like later things are going to occur to me about this movie that I should have said or something, and I feel some frustration in my inability to really talk about why I still like the movie. As I said, it's much easier for me to identify the problems with it than the positive things, but there's still enough positivity in there that I still kind of enjoy the movie. But everything, you said, like your criticism, I totally agree with you. I think it's all pretty obvious. Again, it's not funny enough. There are characters that
Dan
are just not
Aykroyd,
that interesting.
John Candy. I just feel like they're underused, man. They're just,
Mhm.
super funny guys that are
Yeah.
sleeping through scenes.
And they tell Dan Aykroyd, like, just be as straight and serious as you can be. I mean, the only thing that's over top about him is, like, yes, he's, like, really dedicated, and that's the
Yeah.
thing, right? He's, like, he's really by the book and everything, but that's not that funny. In fact, it's not really funny at all.
Oh,
It's just like, yeah, he's really over the top and overzealous, and, he's a really dedicated soldier, and blah, blah, blah. And he has that perfect voice for, like, giving orders and yelling about things, but you're not giving him good lines. There's only so much he can do. I mean,
Well,
are we
should-
supposed to really think it's funny when he's in the streets, like stirring up the xenophobia and stuff, like saying, "Oh, they're gonna come for your children," and blah 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 blah, and the Japs are gonna blah. Like,
yeah.
none of that's funny. It's just Dan Aykroyd saying a bunch of fear mongering.
But I mean, I guess Spielberg is not a funny guy, like, because he hasn't ever done another comedy, right?
I don't think he's done anything that was like a full like
Strictly,
yeah. He's always had like comedic elements in his
Yeah.
movie, but it's true. Like, think of those. Like, how well do they land? Like, is there anything in Hook that makes you laugh? It just all makes me cringe. I mean, it felt horribly dated. Like even still in the '90s, it felt horribly dated.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, not to pick on Robin Williams, but as much as I love Robin Williams and he's a great talent, there are certain movies of his that really stand out where he's just, like, trying too hard to do some sort of humor that does not translate now, or it just doesn't hold up and stuff. Like, I mean, I still can get a kick out of Mrs. Doubtfire, but man, like, are we really supposed to be impressed by him, like, rapping with a raptor? Like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I like it, but I like that movie, so that's.
Yeah. I do feel bad that people pick apart that movie so much by, like, treating it like it's not a comedy. I'm like, it is a comedy, and yet people are just like, well, he's like a horrible father, or he should go to jail. I'm just like, yeah, I know the whole point of these movies is they're ridiculous situations that don't happen in real life, so why are you applying that to the movie?
He wasn't a horrible father, though. He was, like, throwing a birthday party. That's what his wife got so mad about.
Yeah, well, he did break a bunch of laws while he did it and tear the house apart.
Yeah, well, I mean, he wasn't a bad father, though. Well,
I don't know.
guess endangering children or whatever.
I mean, it's not so much that I, like, think that what he did was so terrible, but it's more like I can totally see her point of view is the type of thing.
Well,
And
I
you
thought
feel
she
sorry for her,
overreacted.
and you feel sorry for her character, because her character is made to look like some shrew. And she even points that out. It's like, you're always the fun one, and I have to be, like, the bad guy, even though I'm just a
Right.
sensible, ordinary person. And I do feel like the movie, even though she gets to have that line, the movie is still like that. And how bad do you feel for Pierce Brosnan?
Fuck that guy.
The worst thing he does is he calls him a loser to somebody else. He
Yeah.
does nothing else dickish at all. Like, he even says, like one guy says, wow, you're, like, this woman has 3 kids and an ex-husband. That's a lot of baggage. He says, I don't care. Like, I love this woman, and I think the kids are great. Which is a very mature and
Sure.
nice attitude, and he's really happy to have them and stuff. And yet he's still portrayed as some sort of, like, villain that, like, Robin Williams has to vanquish. Of course, in the end, he doesn't, and, you know. But still, they have to set it up like he's some dick. It's like, one thing, he's British. You know, an American audience is going to hate that British snob and stuff. But he has one dick moment, and that's the part where the guy says, what about the ex-husband? He says, what can I say? The guy's a loser. And then she, like, throws something at his head. Or he throws something at his head. But the rest of it,
It's a drive-by fruiting.
yeah. I think at one point, he vandalizes his car for no
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
He,
And then he poisons him, or
yeah, he poisons him at the... At least he then helps him. So I just
Oh, man.
I mean, there's a few comedies. I mean, I know we're going down a rabbit hole here, but think about another comedy that I still pretty much like. I like Liar Liar. But again, and this is even worse for the guy, Carrie Elwes' character, he loses in the end. Like, he doesn't, it's not like in Mrs. Doubtfire where it's like, well, okay, you know, they're still going to stay broken up and she's going to probably marry or stay with, what's his name? And this, no. He vanquishes Carrie Elwes and gets his wife back. Is Carrie Elwes a bad guy? This guy is willing to go to Boston for this woman and is not at all intimidated by her career or anything like that. Again, loves the kid, doesn't mind that it's somebody else's kid, and yet we're supposed to root against him because he can't do a good impersonation of the Claw. Like, yeah, okay, so he's not funny. But again, he's not the villain in the movie, but again, we're supposed to root against him. And I just feel sorry for him because he's a good guy. He's a nice guy. He genuinely cares about this woman. He cares about the kid. He's nothing but, and unlike Pierce Brosnan, he's nothing but nice to Jim Carrey's character. He says, hey, good to see you, and stuff. And it's not phony or fake at all. But because he's kind of lame and not funny and can't do the Claw, like, we're supposed to think he sucks. And we're glad that, like, at some point, the wife says, nope, fuck you, I'm going back to my weird, demented, unstable husband. You know, so there's a few movies where they do that kind of thing, where you actually kind of feel bad for the guy that's supposed to be, like, you know, the interloper or whatever. I don't know. It's kind of like we're being taught that, like, there's no, like, if a woman gets divorced, she should never remarry. It's just, it's a terrible thing to do. You know.
as far as Mrs. Doubtfire goes, like, I really feel like she overreacts. I mean, in the film, he's meant to look like, yeah, he goes overboard, and he doesn't do exactly what she wants. But I mean, he's doing it for the kids, and then she takes his kids away, like, completely. Like, he can't see his children. I mean, like, that's fucked up, you know.
Yeah, I don't think
So,
she needed to lead with that. You know, when they
Totally.
first get, I mean, okay, you're upset and you're going to get divorced. Okay, get divorced. But I do think it was a bit over the top to say, oh, you're not even fit to see the kids. It's like, no, you were mad about how the marriage crumbled, and you were right. We can't be married anymore. But what point do you have about taking the kids away from him? I do agree with that.
I mean, I think you're supposed to side with him there. to where, oh sure, let's get kooky and dress him up like a woman because it's
Yeah.
his
And
only way
again,
of
it
interacting with his
why
children.
not? Because it's a movie, and yeah, let's not put it
Eh,
all in the context of real life. It's funny that he's doing this, and I can get something out of it.
you
But
don't.
anyway, my point was just some of the humor is pretty dated. Is all I mean. I still like the movie.
Sure, I can see that. Comedies are like that though. I mean,
Yeah, I mean it's very difficult to make a movie a comedy that's like timeless.
like
Where
watch a
like
comedy from like the '40s. It's like probably not going to be very entertaining.
yeah, because we just have such different sensibilities.
Well, like Three Stooges, I think still translates. Stuff like that, Buster Keaton stuff, but
Yeah.
it's not exactly highbrow stuff. You know, but I don't know. I feel like we
But
could talk
yeah.
about Mrs. Doubtfire for quite a bit longer.
I mean, I still like the movie. I still like it, but I would. I mean, it's certainly a lot better than Hook.
You don't see like quirky comedies like that as much as you used to. Now, like the only comedies that goes to the theaters are like sex comedies,
Yeah.
like adult.
I don't want to go on a whole thing here, but I feel like big part of what's comedic now is like just a celebration of stupidity. I'd hate to say it, but like being shallow and dumb. Because there's a difference between like making characters that are dumb in like a really over the top fantasy way, like Dumb and Dumber. In Dumb and Dumber, they're so dumb that like there's nobody who's really that dumb in the movie, and it's kind of cartoony the way the movie works, right? So
Yeah,
I don't hate those characters because they're just really comically over the top dumb. And I think I've talked to you about this before, but the movie that really raised my hackles about this was I saw a movie called Mike and Dave Need Wedding Dates.
yeah,
And Mike and Dave are fucking morons.
yeah.
But the dates they get are also morons. And, at the end they all wind up together because they're a perfect match for each other. But to me, it's just a celebration of vapidness and stupidity. And it's, like, serious. Like, they're not, like, over-the-top dumb the way the Dumb and Dumber guys are. They're just, dumb guys like you would know in real life. And I'm thinking, this is a celebration of them and their stupid lack of intelligence and lack of class and lack of self-awareness. Like, that's what the movie is celebrating, because, like, in the end, it's like a happy ending. Because, yeah, the two chicks that are with them are, like scam artists that think they're going to scam them, and they're really shallow and vapid and stupid, too. But that's the whole point, is they find out, hey, these guys are stupid and shallow and vapid the same way we are. We click! And, like, yeah, so I feel like there's other movies that kind of follow that, not to that degree, but that's just what it's all about. Or we're just supposed to, like, really cheer for horrible people, which has, like, become Adam Sandler's go-to thing in the last decade. He's always some really, like, sexist, selfish son of a bitch that we're supposed to, for some reason, root for. The worst one is definitely Just Go With It, though, right? And Just Go With It, he's, like, what, like some dentist or something? He's always, like, really affluent.
Oh, and he's always has like the most attractive spouse or.
And
girlfriend or
well, this one is where he doesn't have a spouse. He wants
whatever.
to, remember, for some reason, he wants to get with, like, some super hot, like, supermodel level 23-year-old. And for some reason, he needs to convince, who is it, somewhat more age appropriate, the bitch from Friends,
Jennifer
Jennifer Aniston.
Aniston.
And he needs her to pretend to be his ex-wife. I have no idea why. But the whole point is, he needs her to do some ridiculous charade with him so that he can ingratiate himself more to this young one that he's already entangled with. And anyway, the whole point is just go with it.
What?
It's like, what I want is important. I'm selfish. I need to lie to this girl to seal the deal. I need everybody around me to, indulge me in this deception. And we're supposed to root for him.
So let me guess. Like I haven't seen that movie, but does he wind up with Jennifer Aniston at the end?
Probably. I can't even remember the end, but maybe
Like
that's
it's-
what it is. Yeah, in pretending to be his ex. But still, the whole point is he finds his happiness or something. I don't know.
I watched this movie, The Zookeeper. Oh, you would love it. It's got
I
Kevin
know.
James in it.
Yeah. Doesn't he talk to
It's-
animals or something?
yeah. I was just trying to find something to shut my children up,
Yeah.
and that was not like horrible. But it, man, it's like the most formulaic thing I've ever seen. It's the same thing. Like his fellow zookeeper is like, I think Rosario Dawson, like super hot.
Yeah.
And then he's
She
trying
is.
to get back his ex girlfriend, so he's like, she's gonna help him you know, by making her jealous and all this other shit, like pretend like she's his girlfriend. And obviously,
Yeah.
she's into him, and he's like, you know, constantly
I
wanting.
think Adam Sandler helped co-write the movie
Yeah, he
because
did.
it's like his formula. Because and just go with it.
Yeah,
The whole thing is he's 45, a successful plastic surgeon in Los Angeles who feigns unhappy marriages to get women and avoid romantic commitment that may lead to heartbreak. And yeah, so the whole thing is he meets this chick, Brooklyn Decker, who the actress herself, let's see, was born in 1987. So there you go.
oh, she's like a model or something, like or was before that. You
Oh
know,
yeah, she's
like
in
Sports
Sports
Illustrated or something.
Illustrated and Victoria's Secret and all
Yeah,
this stuff. She wasn't even really an actor because I'm sure Adam Sandler just took out a book of like masturbatory things and pointed at her and said she's going to be the romantic interest in this movie. And they're like, yes, Adam, of course. Like she's not an actress, but that doesn't matter.
yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So that's what's going on there. Is like, yeah, he wants to get with her, and in real life, he's what like 21 years older than her or something. I don't know, something like that. But anyway, the whole point is he uses what's her name to like make it seem like she's his really mean ex who's mistreated him, so that she'll like I guess empathize with him and eventually fuck him. And I did see pretty much the whole movie, but I can't remember. But
That's
but yeah, I'm pretty sure he does in the end. Well, of course, wind up with Jennifer Aniston. So it's supposed to make it seem like he's learned something, like so, oh, like he's learned something, and he's with the more age appropriate woman. But no, you still do not feel like you're rooting for this dick.
there was a time and a place when I liked Adam Sandler and I
Sure.
liked his movies, like maybe like post Waterboy, maybe.
Yeah. Once we got into like the 2000s, he went off a cliff for me.
Yeah, like
But
Big Daddy. I think I didn't like Big Daddy.
I liked it when I saw it at the time, but I was quite young, and
Yeah,
then later I was like, this is boring shit.
yeah. Um, you know, they say working with him is great though. Like
Yeah,
it's
I know.
really easy.
That's why he keeps making these movies, and he gets like big stars like Al Pacino and stuff in his
Yeah,
movies because making a movie is great. Because almost all of his movies the last 10 years are in some like tropical, awesome location for one
right.
thing. And again, I like it. He is a genuinely nice guy, and it is true.
Yeah,
Like unlike a lot of movie stars, he's never really let it go to his head, at least in a personal sense, and that like he's really casual and approachable, and he's really nice to everybody on set, not just actors, just the crew in general and stuff. And he's very nice, so that's cool and all. It's just too bad that his movies has spiraled out of control to a shitstorm of I don't
yeah. I
know.
mean, it just the movies aren't for me. I'm sure he's a nice guy. Like I heard him on Conan O'Brien's podcast, and you know, you know exactly what you said. Seems like a genuine, like down to earth guy, considering
Yeah,
he's extremely wealthy. But
yeah. But
you know,
back
he's
to sorry, go
uh,
ahead. Let's finish
David
this off.
Spade and what's Rob
Rob Schneider.
Schneider. Like those guys,
They
like
owe their careers to him because they wouldn't get work elsewhere.
they're like super wealthy because of that stuff, man.
Yeah. So I can understand them being certain loyalty to him. But anyway, getting back to what started thinking about comedy, you are correct looking at it. Like 1941 was basically the last time Spielberg attempted a straightforward comedy. From then on, he did movies that had some comedic elements in them, like a Hook. But for the most part, he stuck with what he was good at, which is basically sort of dramatic films and adventure type films. But you haven't seen Ready Player One. I'd recommend
No, I
watching.
did, I did.
Oh, you did? Yeah. What? It wasn't that bad, huh?
I feel like you do. It really wasn't made for me.
Yeah. Same here.
Um,
Again, it's more
I
for
just
people who are like maybe in their early 20s and teens who have like this weird fascination with the 80s because they didn't live through them to know that the 80s actually weren't that good. but
I feel like it's like a mediocre film, but it's just so chock full of the references and
Mhm.
it's just a game of look at that, I know what that
Yeah.
is, I know what
Yeah.
that is, and
Exactly.
it's I mean
Which has become a super profitable thing. I get it.
it's kind of cool, but I mean
Yeah.
yeah, Mega Godzilla and
Yeah.
Chucky.
The story's very mediocre. The
Yeah,
characters are
exactly.
very mediocre. Here I have to say though, there's one character who I thought was super out of place. I don't think you ever see his real person. You only see like his weird like game world avatar, and that's oh, shit. He's a comedic guy of the last few years. He's in like Deadpool. He's Deadpool's friend.
Oh, the yeah, Fuck, I know what you're talking about.
Anyway, he felt so out of place. I couldn't believe it. I was like, really? This is the guy? It's like TJ something. Or...
Yeah, T.J. Miller.
Yeah, TJ Miller. Hey, I have nothing against that guy, but he just seems so out of place in that movie. It was bizarre. Like, I couldn't believe it when I heard his voice, and I'm good at voices, so I knew immediately it was him, and I was like, what the fuck is he doing in this movie? This is bizarre beyond... Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyways, anyway, as the audience knows, we have some very complicated opinions about Adam Sandler and Spielberg. But, yeah, so... We're not going to do any Adam Sandler movies on this show. We're too highbrow for that. But that doesn't mean we won't talk about him separately, as we often do. So, you know, you get a little bit of everything. But, as far as Spielberg goes, he's so prolific and has so many movies. We haven't closed the book on him. We might still do some other movies. But as we said, the whole point of the show, more or less, is to do movies that are, like, a little, not necessarily obscure, but not really the big mainstream ones, especially ones that everybody has already said, like, I love Jurassic Park, but there's not much point in us doing a show on Jurassic Park, I don't think. What were we going to say about it that
It
hasn't
would
been
just be
said?
gushing about how good
And
it
most
is.
of it just been gushing. And I realize that I've done a fair amount of gushing on this show, but at least I feel like it's gushing about, you know, movies that maybe the audience hasn't seen, so at least I can, you know, recommend them to them, you know, maybe a foreign film or an indie film and stuff, and say, yeah, I have a lot of gushing, but it's a film maybe you don't know, or you haven't seen, or even heard of, so... In the case of Spielberg, we're always going to hear of his movies, so we're not going to do a bunch. But I think in the future we still might do one or two more. There are a couple things that interest me. Like I said, I want to at least see Always and at least see Amistad, because I've never seen either. I don't know if after seeing them I'll feel like we could do a show on them, but, you know. I don't know, Munich might be an interesting one to do. It's a possibility.
That's really
So-
one of the only ones I can think of. But I mean, there's so many that you know we haven't even seen from the past decade.
And as I said, yeah, the last, you know, like, of, like, his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, of his last 7 movies, I've seen 1. So,
Ready Player One,
yeah, Ready Player One.
and you just watched that one recently.
Yeah. But yeah, so, I don't know. But anyway, I can say for the immediate future what we're going to do is that we are going to follow this up hopefully next week. Hopefully after I've had a fucking terrible August. I'm not going to bitch about it on air here. But anyway, get going with some continuity here. We're going to do City of God, which I'm really excited about because I haven't seen that in so many years.
Me either.
But I really liked it. And I think it's a really cool movie to talk about for sure. So that should be good. And then, as I said, as we get into September, what we usually do going towards Halloween is try to do darker stuff, not necessarily horror, but, you know, maybe darker, twisted stuff, as we've done. And we have an idea for a theme for that, and we won't reveal that just yet, but we do have an idea for that, which would line up about 3 or 4 movies that we would pick from that, which I think would be pretty cool. So, Jay and I will discuss that going forward, and when we have a more firm idea of what it is, we will announce that officially to let you guys know.
Yeah, we're almost in the Halloween season.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Wow.
have not gotten too much done over the summer, which is mostly my fault. At one point I was away, and for most of August I've been sick is actually what it is. I always like to brag about how I never get sick. Well, it finally fucking hit me. But anyway, I'm doing better now, and I'm getting there stuff, so... Thanks a lot for your guys' patience, because I know there are some people that follow the show, you know, quite emphatically, which we really, really appreciate. So I know there are at least a few of you out there that really notice when a week goes by that we don't do an episode. So we want to let you know we're going to get back to that and getting some more consistency going. We definitely do have some shows in the future lined up, so looking forward to that. So I guess that's going to do it for this one. That was 1941 from 1979, directed by the great Steven Spielberg. A movie that I admire for its scope and its technicality and its presentation, and I even admire for its ambition, but I feel falls flat. And it's pretty much how Jay feels too. He said, we've got a movie here that is really trying hard to be funny, and it's not really that funny, and is really trying hard to do a lot of things and just not succeeding and making a lot of mistakes and errors, as we talked about. So, still, I can't call it a bad movie. I just think it's a movie that sets out to do something and doesn't accomplish it. Which, I know, you're going to say, well, doesn't that make it a failure? And again, I'm lost. I don't know how to say it. I can't quite call it a failure. There's something in there that I can still enjoy. but it's definitely a super flawed movie and not nearly one of among Spielberg's best. And so sometimes when we look at these things that are flops, and again, this was not particularly exactly technically a flop, but in the context of his career is much more so. Yeah, kind of like with AI, I can totally get why it was. I really loved Empire of the Sun, and I feel like the reasons that didn't do as well had less to do with flaws that the movie actually had, and more to do with circumstance, etc., etc. But see that episode for that before I blather on about Empire of the Sun, and we'll actually finish the show here. So thanks a lot, guys, for watching.
Yep. We'll see you next time, guys.
All right,
On the yard.
on the yard as always. Peace out.